What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Welcome to a Thursday show, gang. Getting a little early start here in the afternoon for a football show, anyway. Typically, we're still winding down the baseball show. We're like halfway through it by now. Got some sirens going in the background here as we get started. But we're diving in today. We're going to do a main slate overview show, the last first look show of the week. We're going to take a look at just the game environments, how the stacks rank out in our stack rankings, and then we're going to talk about the quarterbacks, just like we did last week, midweek. Get us a little bit of a foot in the door for the main slate, cut down on the length and the depth that we have to go to in our marathon game-by-game skills player breakdown that will probably be tomorrow evening, I would expect. That's the plan, at least as of right now. It might be Saturday evening. I'd rather do it tomorrow. Just smooths things out across the board. I'm still going to be awake probably between now and, what time is the slate like? 1 o'clock on Sunday. It's going to be, like 70 some odd hours. So probably going to sleep like 6 of those and be working on football the rest of the time. But that's okay. That's part of the fun. We're going to talk Thursday night football for the showdown slate at the end. So it's going to be like an hour probably. I'm going to try and hit like 6:30 on the nose where we usually get started for a showdown slate show. Do a 6:30 to 7:30 on the showdown. We'll build lineups. We'll take a look at Ace Mind. I got Ace Mind running in the background right now. And then we'll be off and running for a interesting looking Thursday night game between the Giants and the Cowboys that is almost certainly bound to disappoint. Not only is it a Thursday night game, which is just almost always disappointing, it's the Giants and the Cowboys. It's Daniel Jones. It's probably going to be bound for disappointment. But Jones does have one extraordinarily good rookie receiver, kind of making him look good out there, which is a big part of my concerns about the Giants going forward. I want Malik Neighbors to be really, really good. I don't want him to be so good that he makes Daniel Jones look good and gives them second thoughts about whether or not they want to move on from that situation. And if we're going to continue hauling in acrobatic touchdown catches on balls 5 yards, to our right, 3 feet above our head, that might happen. Just going to run another Ace Mine real quick in the background here. I don't like where RG's ownership, and apologies to anybody from RG, out of the handful of people who are here right now who might be here spying on us. The FanDuel ownership is really shaky for these showdown slates, and it has an impact on the sim results. So what I'm trying to do, their DK ownership is fairly on point, and those sim results come out pretty good. I'm trying to tweak the ownership numbers, and it's typically around the flex positions. They don't go high enough. Guys get really massively owned on FanDuel, and on DK, of course, but it's a little bit more of a spread on DK, where it peaks a little bit higher on FanDuel, and I feel like they don't have that quite right. So I'm just going to rerun this one with my slightly adjusted ownership and see where we land. How's everybody doing out there? How's your Thursdays going? Anybody play that early baseball slate? I threw one lineup into it. It is an ugly day of baseball. Nothing for the late night slate for baseball. It's just 3 games. The main slates were basically in the afternoon. FanDuel did an equal prize pool across both. For some reason, they called the 3-game night slate their main slate, but it was tiny and not worthwhile. So nothing on that. But presumably back for a big final show for the baseball season tomorrow. That's the plan for that. I assume it's going to be a monster slate. I haven't looked at the schedule yet, but some really interesting races coming down the stretch here, and particularly with that doubleheader now on Monday. It's going to be really interesting. Maybe we'll fire something up if they do showdown slates or something for Monday. Maybe we'll jump on and talk about a showdown slate or something for baseball. Not something I typically chase, but might just be fun, worth talking about. We'll talk playoffs or whatever. All right, let's see. This is all correct and in place. Yeah, so let me save that. Do this. View here. Ace Mind. Oh, fuck. On DraftKings, not on FanDuel. All right. It's an interesting looking main slate, too. We've got some good matchups, some really interesting looking spots for some pretty big offense. Some plausible shootout spots. So it should be a fun one to talk through. Let me just get this kicked off. Everything over here looks correct. Yeah. All right. See how that one comes out. Just eyeballing the DK one. Does look cleaner. Actually, I might rerun the DK one too. Let me start the show here. We'll start talking about something, and I'll grab the DK one in the background because this also came up kind of funky. 85%. Oh, I'm an idiot. Hang on. Fun way to start the show, right? It was only sorted at 20 lineups. Let me see. It's still a big number, but that's all right. That makes more sense. All right, we're good. DK's okay. So anyway, now that some people have collected here and watched me just stumble over myself as I'm teeing up the show, I've got the Ace Mind. That's the Ace Mind template that I was grabbing there that you saw in the background. This is where I just drop in. I've showed this before. I just have this built into the sheet. It's on this tab here, this Ace Mind one. And what I do is I just grab off their template, everything from name through position, and then that's a lookup. I paste the standard deviation that the Ace Mind guys are providing in because that's easy. I've got to look up for the ownership. I look up the field points just matching my projections so that it creates the field with my projections. You can also set that so that I could have it search against like RG's projections if I drop them in there, or stochastic, whoever you want to use. And then I'll look up for the ownership, and then I just copy and paste this directly back into their template and re-upload it into the Sims. Makes it very, very easy to just have that sitting there all the time, so you can just paste. Be aware if you do this and you go back and forth between full slates and showdown slates, there is an extra column that could trip you up. They have a separate column for the captain player ID because I guess those are different on DraftKings, whereas on FanDuel they're actually not, so it doesn't really matter, but that column is there. So I have this one set up in the dashboard here, and then I have a separate one that's just for main slates set up in my other file. But that's something, if you're switching back and forth, you're going to have to take care of that column every time. But anyway, yeah, Power's saying that just jumping in for tonight, Sam Mike Garofalo reported that Slate looks like he'll go. So, yeah, that's an addition to the Giants wide receiver core, mediocre receiver. That's basically all they have if they're not talking about Malik Neighbors. He'll get a couple of looks, but it's certainly teeing up like 12 to 15 targets a game are just going to go to Neighbors' direction the rest of the season. But those guys will get some looks here and there, and those are the key plays for Showdown Slate. So we are going to give those guys a look, but that's going to be a little ways down the line. Let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about this main slate to get us started. The top game on the board, as usual, this is sorted by alphabetically. Technically, this is the last game of Sunday. It's the Sunday night game. It is an absolute beauty with Buffalo at Baltimore. Sorry, DraftKings players, you're only going to get that one as a showdown. You don't have it on your main slate, but that can also, save you some wins. Just ask our pal XX Cubs fan about having to sweat the Sunday night game on FanDuel. But that should be a big, big source of options between both of the high-end quarterbacks in that game. Josh Allen coming off of a monster. Lamar coming off of not the best game in the world, but obviously has some significant, high-end abilities. He's got a good core of skill players around him. I like the skill players from Buffalo as well. Both teams are a little bit more, it's an A-plus quarterback playing with like B- to B, maybe a B+ kind of receivers in there. I do think that Zay Flowers, probably among the wide receiver core, is probably the best overall receiver in that game. But Khalil Shakir, if you look at some of the numbers, his catch rate over the last few seasons is just dramatic. It's just on small volume. So there are players to like in there. They've got the dual-headed tight end in Baltimore. They've got good running back on both teams. So there's a lot of pieces from that late game. I think that's going to be one to watch on FanDuel. Just a 2.5 point spread in Baltimore, so basically even up as far as Vegas is concerned, a 46-point total. On FanDuel, it ranks out Ravens. Did I say Orioles before? I might have said Orioles when I meant Ravens before. That would be the first official one of the season if I did that. Got the Orioles on the mind. Yanks can't put them away. It's kind of bothering me. But the Ravens are stack number 3. If you're not familiar, first time here, just to take you through the board here real quick. Vegas totals. Obvious. It says Vegas right there. Player position rankings. This is where the player ranks out by points and points per dollar value. DraftKings in green, FanDuel in blue. And then same thing for those the stack rankings for those players' overall stacks. So as individuals, Jackson ranks 3 by points and 8 by value on that FanDuel slate, while Allen ranks 4 and 12. They're both very expensive, but they're both easily worthwhile. Their stacks rank 9, 7, and 15, 9, respectively. So kind of middle of the board when it comes to total stacks, and I do think that that kind of reflects the level of those skill players that they work with, where everybody's decent, nobody's great. None of these guys, neither of these guys is throwing to CeeDee Lamb, right? So I think that's a little bit reflected there, but obviously either of these guys can carry their team to a monster day as far as the stack goes. So definitely looks like a great way to build lineups on the FanDuel slate. And the good news about those lower end skill players, and again, lower end relative terms, some of those guys are still very, very good. But as far as stacking it up, it helps average down the prices of those quarterbacks, because you'll find those skill players, Khalil Shakir is going to come in significantly cheaper. I don't have the prices side by side. Then I don't even know who's the top priced receiver. Let's just say CD, since I've got CD on the brain, then CD would on this slate. A questionable Marvin Harrison is 8,200 on this slate, let's say, as an example. So you get a little bit of discount to stack in with these two high-end quarterbacks. In terms of the numbers, that's the other piece we've got over here. These teams are doing opposite things so far on defense. It's very early. Something to keep in mind as we talk about all these numbers, especially the raw numbers, just, surface level stuff here. But so far, the Bills have been giving up 4.7 yards per pass attempt. That ranks 22nd. 4.4 yards per rush attempt, though, ranks second in the league. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the Ravens have been the best defense against the run in terms of stopping the run, in terms of yards per attempt, 2.8 yards per rush attempt. And this is very surface level. I like surface level stuff for football in a lot of ways. It's just simplifies conversations and it gets away from deceptive numbers, as we've talked about before. I'm not saying that I don't believe in the deep data, but I'm saying that the deep data can sometimes create large percentage numbers that actually equate to like 2 targets for a wide receiver. And it can say, all right, that guy got 42% of the air yard share, and it amounted to 3 targets, and he just got 3 very deep targets. That guy can be good, but it's important to contextualize those numbers. So in a lot of ways, that's why I like surface numbers for football. And I've talked about that a lot. But just in a raw form, 2.8 yards per rush attempt allowed so far by that Ravens defense is quite good, but they're allowing 7.5 yards per pass attempt, which ranks 28th so far in football. Could give an opportunity to Josh Allen to fling the ball around the field like he was the other day when he threw 4 touchdown passes. Definitely high-end spot for both QBs. Allen's coming off of 4 touchdowns, 23 of 30 for 263 yards. That was a nice breakout for this season. It's not like we had any questions about Josh Allen, but he had gotten off to not a shaky start, but not a hot start. 18 of 23 for 232 and 2 touchdowns in the first game, and then just 139 yards on 19 attempts and a touchdown in the second game. So it was nice to see him jump into the season. Overall, he's completing 8.8 yards per pass attempt on a 6.6 intended air yards per attempt. He's got 7 touchdowns on the board to lead this. Sam Darnold leads the slate at 8 touchdowns, but second on the slate. Still very good for Josh Allen. Lamar, only 3 touchdowns so far on the season. The output for Lamar can come and go. He's obviously a superstar, especially with his multifaceted ability at the position. But he's been a little bit lower end, and he can have his games where he doesn't throw a touchdown pass. He can have his games where he throws for low yardage. Last time it was more the latter of the two. He threw for 182 yards on 12 of 15 passing. Not exactly a ton of pass volume there either. First 2 games, he threw the ball quite a bit more. 41 pass attempts and 34 pass attempts. He ran one in, right? Yeah, ran one in. He carried the ball 14 times for 87 yards and ran one in against Dallas. And it's funny, the game was very different on either side. He had very few pass attempts, 15 pass attempts. On the other side, we're going to talk about it toward the end of the show with Dak. He threw the ball like 52 times in that game, or 51 times. So just 2 quarterbacks who were having very different experiences in that game. But Lamar just didn't have to do a lot there. But obviously does have significant upside, but needs a little bit of help down the field from the Flowerses of the world, the Batemans of the world. Would definitely help to get their tight end a little bit more engaged. But should be a defense that they can go back and forth with, at the very least. Overall on the season, 7.8 yards per pass attempt, the same, 6.5 intended air yards per attempt. He's completed, technically, he's thrown more yards per game and thrown more passes, completing a lower rate than Josh Allen is. but it obviously gives you more in the rushing game. So far for the season, Jackson on the ground, running the ball 11 and a half times a game, picking up 7.3 yards per rush attempt, nearly 85 yards a game, 5.3 before contact, 2 after contact. He's got a touchdown on the board. Allen's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the board. Not like he can't run with the football, but it's not nearly as big a part of his game. 28 yards a game, 5 and change carries. But still a decent runner with the football and definitely not afraid to take it into the end zone. So high-end spot there. Apologies to everybody on DraftKings sitting here saying, why is he talking about this game? This game's not on the slate, etc., etc. Welcome to the show. Cincinnati, Carolina. If you're just getting here, we are going not in time order, but just in alphabetical order, game by game. I was pleasantly surprised by Andy Dalton. I was skeptical as to whether or not he had it in him, and he came out and he had a day. And he made that Carolina offense, for what it's worth, look actually competent, which is good because I think they do have decent pieces at least. I'm not a big Chuba Hubbard guy. I'm not a big Miles Sanders guy on the ground, but I like a couple of their receivers. So I think he's got weapons to work with, and if he's going to deliver another at least moderately competent performance, he's at least somewhat on the board. He doesn't project out well. These are all relative to just the quarterback projections, obviously. When I first fired it up, it was just basically all one, couple shades of green. So I cut it back and made it all just relative to one another. So among quarterbacks, you can see in just the conditional formatting there, he is low projected. He ranks out as 22-24 across sites by points and 21-25 across sites by value. But it's a game with a 46.5 point total. Carolina's been playing at a high pace. They've been throwing a decent number of passes. They're coming in against a 23rd ranked pass defense, 7 yards per pass attempt allowed so far. Since he's generating 18.9% pressure, nothing an Andy Dalton, the veteran, can't handle. 21% blitz rate, 5 sacks and 2 picks in 3 games. There's nothing overly intimidating about the Cincy defense. And their 4.1 yards per rush attempt ranks 11th overall, but that's probably just guessing, and I can check. Let's see. 4-1. It's got to be tied in multi-way, right? 1, 2, 3. Three teams at 405 to 415. So basically 3 teams tied there. Gettable on the ground, definitely gettable through the air. I could see Andy Dalton having another at least decent day at a reasonable price on both sites. Definitely not my favorite target for a stack, but as a stack, they rank out 16th by points per dollar, 21st by points on DraftKings. 23rd and 22nd doesn't play as well on FanDuel, but maybe a little value to work with there. On the Cincy side, they look a lot better. For one, we got Jamar Chase confirmed he's going to play. He was questionable, but looks good and got removed from the injury report just a little while ago. So we got that news. They land 4 by points and value on DraftKings as a stack, 5 by points, 8 by points per dollar on FanDuel as a stack. Again, 46.5 point game. They're favored by 4. Joe Burrow himself ranks 5 on DK by points, 7 on FanDuel by points, and then oddly 5th and 7th, 7th and 5th. So points per dollar, workable option on either site. And honestly, coming in at 66, 8,000, not a bad price to find Joe Burrow against a Carolina defense that is easily gettable. 4.7 yards per rush attempt, 23rd ranked, and 7.2 yards per pass attempt, 24th ranked so far this season. Seems like a spot we can throw in some Cincy. Last time out, Burrow put up a pretty nice game, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns. Welcome to the season. Threw no picks. He hasn't thrown a pick yet this season. Game 2, he wasn't bad either. That was against Kansas City. 258 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just not a monster. Only 7.2 yards per pass attempt. In this one, he went up to 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Just looked better. Got T. Higgins back on the field. Looked better. Overall for the season for Burrow, 5 touchdowns on the board. 7.2 yards per pass attempt on 6.5 intended air yards per attempt. Completing 71% of his passes and throwing the ball 34 times a game. That's really all we're looking for. Give me 70 plus here. Give me 32 to 35 pass attempts here. And you've got a pretty okay option most weeks. For Dalton, it's just the one game, but 13 of 19, 159 yards through the air, and did throw the 3 touchdown passes, and very solid 8.4 yards per attempt. Just 5.8 intended air yards per attempt, completed 4.1 air yards per attempt, and again, does have some reasonable weapons to work with. So I don't mind a few Dalton shares. Definitely more inclined to lean Burrow between the two. The more likely 300-yard, 3-touchdown guy is definitely Joe Burrow. Got the better weapons to work with. That's why his stack maths out so much higher, just because you're combining him with so much better players. So prefer the Cincy side, but Carolina loosely in play, most particularly on DraftKings, where you can get a little points per dollar out of them. Cleveland and Vegas. The only person who let me down a little bit more than Gardner Minshew did last week was Derek Carr. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but Minshew, not exactly what I was hoping for. I really thought we would have a nice opportunity in that game, and he wasn't bad, but he also wasn't good. Definitely wasn't slate winning. 18 of 28, 214 yards, 1 touchdown. He's thrown 1 touchdown and 1 interception in each of his 3 games so far. I just loved the pass volume, and they were coming in in a situation where the opposing defense had faced the fewest passes because they were so bad, and everybody was just running the ball against them. I believe that was Carolina. And it just didn't click. We got 28 pass attempts, which was the fewest he'd thrown all season. They kind of leaned into the run a little bit more, and he just didn't look all that good. He connected with Jacoby Myers for a TD, which was one of the ones we were calling for, and that was nice, but overall didn't get there. Looks like an okay-ish spot. He does rank 11th by points per dollar on DraftKings, just 16th on FanDuel, 20th and 22nd by raw points. The stack is where it kind of falls short. 14th and 15th by DraftKings points and points per dollar, 18th by points, but 6th by points per dollar on FanDuel. So we're getting a little cheap around some of the skill players, and there are intriguing skill players on that team, at least in the receiving core and the tight end. So it's one to maybe kick around, see what you can put it together with, see what you can get price-wise. They're going up against a defense that ranks 13th, middle of the league against both the pass and the run, 4.4 yards allowed per rush attempt, 6.1 yards allowed per pass attempt so far. 26% pressure rate, and they've gained 9 sacks, so Minshew presumably going to be under a little bit of pressure. They haven't picked anything off yet, but definitely a defensive front that can pressure the QB a little bit. So it'll put a mediocre to not good at all quarterback under a decent amount of pressure, make a run for his life. Again, he's going to have to get the ball out fairly quickly to some of those weapons to make the weapons pay off at all. Just a 37.5 point total. Doesn't look like Vegas is much of a believer in either side of this one. Vegas favored by 2 in a home game. So again, just kind of even up across the board. A couple of low implied totals for both of these teams. Deshaun Watson on the other side comes in as QB 13 by points on DK, 8 by value, 15th and 11th across the FanDuel slate. Watson, where the hell is he? There he is. 2 touchdown passes in week 2, but didn't complete 200 yards, 21 of 37, just 56.8% of his passes were completed for the season. He's under 60% completions. He's throwing the ball a decent amount of the time overall, 45, 34, and 37 pass attempts. And I know I just said part of that is just looking for 34, 35 pass attempts, but the other part was 70-plus completion percentage, or thereabouts at least. 58 is miserable, sub 200 yards a game. He's thrown 3 touchdown passes. He's thrown 2 interceptions, 4.8 yards per pass attempt. Look at that number relative to all these other numbers. Even the other bad ones are a half a yard more, a full yard more. That is a low number. 7.8 intended air yards per attempt, but only completing the short ones. 3 air yards per pass attempt completed. So really limited in terms of his output. He's got a touchdown on the ground. He's run the ball nearly 5 times a game, gaining 6.81 yards per rush attempt, 28.3 yards a game. A little bit of bonus upside there for the money. Floats his projection slightly, gets his projection out a little bit ahead of Gardner Minshew, a little bit ahead of Andy Dalton. For not that much money, you are playing kind of in the middle of the board as far as the QBs are going. That's why he's in yellow, not orange. But it's very limited as far as that option goes. He's going up against a Vegas defense that lands 31st against the run and 21st against the pass in terms of yardage allowed, 5.4 yards per rush attempt, 7 yards per pass attempt. Could just be a day where the Cleveland rush game kind of shines. So it might be a day to look into that. I just don't love that passing attack. But you do have two capable wide receivers in Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy on that squad. Are they both healthy? Let me pull that back up. Bear with me as I bounce around to some of these things. Lots of Q tags and statuses to keep in the old noggin. And then I'll pop back into the chat and say hi to everybody. I kind of just dove in without actually saying hello. I'm sure a bunch of you guys are out there. You rock. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe. Yeah, both those guys are healthy. So Cooper and Jeudy do have the ability to float the quarterback a little bit. David Njoku, questionable at the tight end spot. He's missed a couple. Jerome Ford is questionable. Pierre Strong is also questionable. So as far as that ground game goes, if it becomes a situation where it's just Donta Foreman, then maybe it goes back the other way. Donta Foreman, Gary Brightwell, not the most appealing running backs, but they'll definitely be cheap. So it's a spot to keep an eye on as far as that ground game goes. I just don't like that Cleveland passing attack. Maybe it's just the Deshaun Watson thing. Deshaun Watson from a few years ago, sign me up. This version, I don't think so. Aaron Rodgers coming off of his best game as a Jet. I don't know if you watched it, but actually looked pretty good. But let me jump into chat. 8 games here. Pink hand wave to you too, buddy. Good to see you. Those actually do come up as pink hands most of the time now. I don't know why it sometimes comes up as the description. Harold Haas is here. What's going on, Harold? Harold's making dinner. What are we having, Harold? Hopefully something good. I had a light snack before the show. I had 2 of the milk chocolate macadamia nut cookies from, what you call them? They're so good. The same people that make the, what's the name? Actually, they're right here. The Pepperidge Farm ones in the little white bag. Same ones that make the Milano cookies. That's what I was thinking of. That was my breakfast, lunch, and dinner so far. But I got one of those. I went to the supermarket, and I got, in addition to the cookies, just went on a health food binge. I got a frozen lasagna. So that's going to be in the fridge. That's dinner later. I didn't go pizza last night. I was going to go pizza tonight, but then I ended up just like, let's just be easy. Big, same, chunk of food that I can cook tonight, have a piece of tonight, pop into the fridge, have probably 2 or 3 days worth of leftovers because I got one of the big ones. Ooh, Harold Haas is eating better than me. Garlic, honey, butter, salmon. That sounds good. I'd go for some of that. Power's calling for the Bills to be 4-0 on Sunday night. Yeah, it's a long way to go, but I could see it. There's 89 people currently on the injury report. Jesus. That's disgusting. That's like somebody sent out a tweet. It was Tommy John's birthday, I guess, yesterday. And somebody sent out a tweet that was just like a full list of every player that had ever had Tommy John surgery, and every MLB player. And it was just this like grid of can't even read it font size names. This is like 1,200 players or something like that. If I use the word cooking in reference to the frozen lasagna, Stephen, I definitely did not mean it. Yeah. I can cook, but I do not consider that cooking. And I can cook in a loose sense. The things I know how to make, I cook fairly well. The things I don't know how to make, I would just be guessing. But I did cook in a restaurant for a very, very short time, so I learned how to make a lot of different Italian things, and I picked up other things here and there over the years. But yeah, definitely heating up a frozen lasagna, not cooking. I should actually start the oven now so that it's ready later instead of because if I put it in after we're done here, it'll probably be 10 o'clock by the time the damn thing's thawed out and heated up. But anyway, hopefully you guys weeks are going well. Cujo's here. Male Nurses Rock is here or was here. Guys were in here 15 half hour before the show started. Almost an hour before the show started. Cujo is here at 4:44. Good to see you guys. Anthony Taylor, too. Appreciate everybody. Tell your friends. 1,000 subscribers by the new year. By Christmas. By Hanukkah. By President's Day of next year at the outside. Not to get pessimistic about it. By Valentine's Day. I think we can do it by the new year. Confident in you guys. I think we're going to make it happen. Projections and everything, and the first cut of the Optimizer article will be up on the site tonight. You'll see that probably tomorrow morning. And we'll be back tomorrow and do the full skill players game by game breakdown and all of that. At the end of this show, we're going to run through in about a half hour. We're going to run through the single game for tonight. Dallas at the New York Giants. It is an ugly, humid, nasty kind of a day here, by the way. I would not want to put on the pads today and play football, but it's gross out. It's not particularly hot. It's just like, low 70s probably, but it's just gross, just sticky and feels way worse than it actually is temperature-wise. But we'll get to that one in a little while, and their professionals are paid a lot to play in those conditions. Aaron Rodgers, again, coming off of his best game as a New York Jet, at least in my opinion, looked pretty good. Looked kind of better than I thought we were going to see him. So I'm at least a little bit engaged with the Rodgers option. 6,200, 7,200 across sites. He ranks just 17, 22, 19, 19. I'm more interested in the Jets rushing game. I think that's kind of where we want to live throughout the season. But Rodgers does have, a clear connection with his receiving core, and he's got some decent weapons to work with. So it wouldn't shock me if he came out and had a decent day and put a little bit of a ceiling on that mid-board projection. 16 on DK, 15 and change on FanDuel, right solidly in the middle of the slate, keeps you in play. The stack ranks out as a much better option overall than Rodgers does, just, relative to the other QBs. He's floated by some of those skill players that I mentioned. They rank 8 and 7 on DK, 8 and 7 on FanDuel. So highly playable Jets option going up against that pretty bad Denver team. So far this year, Denver against the run, 4.8 yards per rush attempt. Excuse me, I'm reading the wrong one. 4.4 yards per rush attempt, 16th ranked. Against the pass, 5.1 yards per pass attempt, ranks 3rd. We'll see what happens with that, though. Remember, this defense was very gettable for most of last year. Some improvements, obviously, have been made, but we'll see how it all comes out in the wash. Good opportunity for Rodgers to exploit them, I think, here. So definitely a spot where we can lean Jets. I do think maybe, though, it could be one of those ones where some of their skill players just on their own as standalone options in other lineups do look a little bit better even than the full stack, maybe, especially if you're not a believer in Rodgers. It's also not the best game environment for building a full stack around a quarterback. That's why, again, I kind of lean more into the running game there. 39.5 point total. The Jets favored by 7.5 in a home game. Denver not really able to hold up much of their end of that offensive equation. So I really don't like it all that much for stacking, despite how it ranks out. Just kind of like one of the lower end of the semi-compelling options. Obviously, they're in a spot where it's a very winnable football game. Bo Nix at 51.66. Some of the takes this week seem to be, Bo Nix, showing improvement out there. Yeah, his completion percentage went up. He completed 25 of 36 this week after completing 20 of 35 the week before. But he completed 26 of 42 in week 1. He threw for 138 yards that week, 246 in week 2, and 216 yards in week 3. And most notably to me, and I'm not going to say that you've improved as an NFL quarterback until you've done this one thing. And it's kind of an important thing for an NFL quarterback to do, and that's throw a touchdown pass. Dude hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in 3 games, and people are out there saying that he's good or improving. Let's be realistic about this option. 4 interceptions. At least he didn't throw a pick in the last game. His yards per attempt actually went down from week 2, though. 7 yards per attempt in week 2, 6 yards per attempt in week 3. I do not like what I've seen from this kid so far. 23rd and 20th on DK, 25th and 24th on FanDuel, and he doesn't have great weapons to work with either. Cortland Sutton's a volume-based receiver. Their running game is a mess. 23rd and 20th on DK, 25th and 24th as a stack. Really doesn't look like an appealing option. The Jets defense, they rank 5th so far against the pass, 5.4 yards allowed per pass attempt. 25th, probably going to improve this week, 4.8 yards per rush attempt. I like them a little bit to stop this rushing attack. Just 5.3 yards completed per pass attempt so far for Bo Nix. But again, that is a half a yard higher than what Deshaun Watson's given us so far at 4.8. So that is noteworthy. Just 7.4 intended air yards per attempt, completing 3.3. He's run the ball a little bit. He has run the ball in for 2 touchdowns. But again, has not thrown a touchdown pass yet. Kind of crucial. So extraordinarily limited stack, extraordinarily limited option. Even to the point where in Jets stacks, I don't know how viable bring-back plays really are from this offense. Until we really see any signs of life from that passing game. I don't love running backs in most situations as bring-back plays anyway. And those Denver running backs against the Jets defense, it just doesn't feel right in a game where they're probably going to have to throw the ball. So, all things Jets would be the play here. But even that, for me, it's a little bit more limited. Maybe it's just the skill players focus on the running game. Good one between Houston and Jacksonville. 46-point total there. Houston favored by 5.5 in a home game. No life from Trevor Lawrence last week. We got to hope for better. If they get better from Trevor Lawrence, I like Jacksonville to hang in this game, and it could turn into a little bit of a shootout. But Lawrence was bad last week. CJ Stroud didn't exactly accomplish much in week 3. He only completed 20 of 31 for 215. He threw a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Hasn't exactly had a big standout game. Hasn't thrown for 300 yards yet. 2 of those were just more, we don't need to take out our full offense and show it to everybody yet. We can win these games without doing that. And then just a little bit more limited in the third game. But Lawrence has just flat out looked pretty bad. 21 of 38 in week 3, 178 yards, a touchdown, and interception. In week 2, he completed 14 of 20. That's 46.7%. Did throw for 220 yards, but 220 completely empty yards. No touchdowns, no picks. 12 of 21 the week before that for just 162 and a touchdown. It has been limited from somebody that's, I'm on record just a few weeks ago saying that I thought this would be the year that he took the big leap when he failed to do so last year. Maybe he's just not going to ever do it. Going up against a defense that's ranked 10th against the run right now, 4.1 yards per rush attempt, 5.8 yards per pass attempt allowed, sits 9th. Houston's defense been pretty decent, so a little bit of a tall order to ask Jacksonville to hang, but I'm willing to give Trevor Lawrence a little bit more leash. I like the skill players on that team a lot, so he's got weapons to work with. It's just a matter of how he's playing, and if he's throwing the ball 11 feet over somebody's head again, throwing the ball directly to the defense again, it's going to be a problem. 15th and 14th on DK, 17th and 15th on FanDuel. Stack ranks just 18-19 and 21-19. So it's not like, there's any real great reason to go rush off and roster them. It might be a situation where some of the skill players from Jacksonville just play as cogs in the machine on the other side of a Houston stack. Houston ranks out very well. 3rd and 5th by points across sites, 6th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 1st by points per dollar on FanDuel. Pretty solid option. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the quarterbacks. 3rd and 6th, 5th and 1st for CJ Stroud. 1st and 5th for the stack. Get mixed up on my own board here sometimes. 1st and 5th for the stack. So 1st by points per dollar on DK. 1st by points per dollar and by points and points per dollar on FanDuel. Screw that up. 1.5 DK, 1.1 FanDuel. That's all you need to know. Stroud is very good. Has significant upside to 300-plus yards games. Has excellent weapons in the passing game to work with. So far, we haven't seen as much this season from Tank Dell as we saw in his moments last year. But we've seen a fantastic connection with Nico. We've seen a pretty good and developing connection with Diggs. There's a lot to like in that passing attack basically every week. And they're priced pretty effectively this week. So, looks like a killer spot to me. They are going up against a team that ranks 8 against the run, 4.0 yards per rush attempt. Might limit the rushing game a little bit, but really, I want Houston for that passing attack. 27th ranked so far against the pass, 7.4 yards allowed per pass attempt. They've also 7.4 yards allowed per pass attempt, allowing on 34 attempts per game, so a lot of volume. They've come up with just a 4.67% sack rate, which ranks 28th in football. They're allowing 28 points per game, which ranks 28th in football. So there's a lot of potential upside here for Houston's offense. I don't think I'm breaking any new ground here, but it just looks like a pretty killer spot to me. So far for the season, Stroud throwing a 7.4 intended air yards per attempt, completing 7.2 yards per pass attempt, 4.5 in air yards, 4 touchdowns on the season to 2 interceptions, completing nearly 68% of his passes on 33 attempts per game. Gives him solid footing with upside for more in any specific game going into the 40-plus pass attempts department and 300-plus yards. Stroud and the Texans easily over the Jaguars, but Lawrence is at least affordable, and he does have some weapons to work with. I believe that there's I'm reluctant to jump off the Lawrence bandwagon, just based on the raw talent there. I don't know that it's going to work out, though. Speaking of things that seem like they're just off a little bit, Patty Mahomes and that KC offense. Winning football games, sure, but Kelsey's not engaged in the season. They're taking some hits in the running game. Mahomes has been just kind of mediocre, at least as far as his fantasy out. But again, I mean, if you can win football games the way they're doing, then perfectly fine. Rashee Rice has been a significant piece this year. We're 3 games in. Mahomes has thrown a few TDs. He's got 5 TDs on the board, but 291 yards in week 1 on 20 of 28, a touchdown and an interception. Week 2, just 151 yards on 18 of 25, 2 touchdowns but 2 picks. Week 3, 26 of 39, 217 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. There's no big games in there yet. It's only 3 weeks, obviously. There's nothing to really be concerned about outside of maybe the connection with Kelsey. So far, Kelsey has 8 catches on 12 targets over 3 games, 69 yards and no touchdowns, 5.8 yards per target, and again, only targeted 12 times over 3 games. Just doing some quick. There was only 1 2-week stretch last year in which Kelsey was targeted fewer than 12 times. Week 16 and 17, he was targeted 11 times combined, 7 and 4. Every other 2-week stretch last year, he saw at least 12 targets. Pretty bonkers drop in volume. He's got his mind on Taylor and on podcasting and commercials, and he's an actor now and all sorts of things. You remember Willie Mays Hayes? Not the original, the Omar Epps version from Major League 2. He was shooting the movie with Jesse the Body Ventura, and he was all out of baseball shape and not ready to play and everything. That might be what we're dealing with Kelsey here. There's also the theory that Patrick Mahomes doesn't throw the ball to people who vote blue. Who knows? Or whose girlfriends do anyway. Who knows? There's a lot going on in KC right now. But obviously some significant weapons. Just a 39.5 point total. KC favored by 7.5. Doesn't exactly speak to like monster upside in the passing game though. This is not a good pass defense. They rank 22nd with 7 yards allowed per pass attempt. They rank 12th against the run, 4.3 yards allowed per. I keep doing that. I keep jumping down to the other one. They rank 8th, 5.8 yards per pass attempt. I knew it didn't sound right. Let me pull up the full sheet here. Yeah. 4.7 yards per play overall, ranks 8th. 3.9 yards per rush attempt, ranks 7th. 5.8 yards per pass attempt, ranks 8th. So the defense has been decent so far. Should be a game that the Chiefs are able to pick up and run away with because there's not much offense coming the other way. Justin Herbert playing with a hurt, I want to say it was an ankle. He aggravated it again the other day. Yeah, ankle. Practicing on a limited basis. Seems almost definite that he's going to play and just play hurt. Has been limited overall this season. Last week, 1 touchdown, 125 yards on 12 of 18. In week 2, 14 of 20 for 2 touchdowns, 130 yards through a pick. Same kind of results in week 1. It's been really limited. The wide receiver core is significantly more limited than it used to be. He's thrown for 133 yards a game in 3 games, 21 attempts per game. There's really not much here to like at all right now. 7.3 intended air yards per attempt, 6.2 yards per pass attempt completed. Not much. We're obviously not running the football with Justin Herbert. So it's really just kind of heavily leaning into the KC side of this one, which feels kind of obvious. Maybe taking a look at the KC rushing game could be a little bit advantageous just with KC favored by so much. in a somewhat lightly totaled game. Kind of like the Jets game. Basically the exact same line. Kind of just favors maybe picking off some pieces, maybe picking off some of the rushing game. Maybe if confidence is eroded in Kelsey to the point where he's going to be a little bit low owned, you can grab that spot and get a little bit of peak tight end with a little value on it. There's not a ton to love in that KC Chargers game. As far as the stack rankings go, 22nd, 24, 24, 26 across sites for the Chargers. Just nothing there to work with at all. A little bit more life in the Chiefs, obviously. 9 and 14 on DK, 11 and 10 on FanDuel. Playable. Chicago, Caleb finally had a game. Chicago fans breathe a sigh of relief, I think, with that one. It was in a losing effort, but he still had a game. 33 of 52, the most pass attempts he's thrown, the most completions by 10 in a game. 363 yards through the air, through 2 touchdowns. Did throw 2 interceptions. Got to clean that up a little bit. Only ran the ball once, gained 8 yards. Had run the ball 5 times in each of the first 2 games. A little bit more work in the pocket. They ended up losing, what was the score? 21-16. Not exactly a shootout, but he got the opportunity to throw the ball a significant amount of times in that game. Threw the ball 10 times in the red zone. Got there twice. They've let him throw it a decent amount of times in the red zone. 3 in the first game, 1 in the second game. He took 2 downfield shots in that game. Completed a 7.0 yards per pass attempt in that one. Obviously, threw the ball more times for more yardage. But the first time he's thrown the ball over 40 yards as well. Had 2 attempts of that distance. Playable upside at the absolute worst. He's going to be going up against a Rams defense that's allowing 5.1 yards per attempt on the ground, 9.4 yards per pass attempt, ranks 32nd in football. That's the worst if you're not familiar. There are 32 teams in the league. They've given up 30.3 points per game, real life points per game. That ranks 31st, 425 plus yards per game overall. That ranks 32nd. The Rams defense has been very bad, and their offense really not all that good and missing some of their most significant weapons. So it's a question mark as to whether or not they hang in this game. It is a close spread, just a 3-point spread, 40.5 points on the board for the game total. Maybe LA keeps it a little bit close. Maybe Stafford has a decent enough day to keep them in this game, working with the third and fourth wide receivers on the depth chart. Definitely better weapons on the Chicago side at this point. Caleb ranks 9th and 5th on DraftKings. Points and points per dollar, 11th and 7th points and points per dollar on FanDuel. You can see, though, the stack overall takes a bit of a hit. 17, 18, 19, and 21. A little bit of a hit in the rushing game. Good receivers up at the top, but it's really all about Caleb and those 2 peak receivers. On the Rams side, definitely takes a hit across the board. Without their 2 prime receivers, 2 of the best in the game, Matthew Stafford and that entire offense becomes a lot more limited. If you're looking, maybe you're looking Kyren Williams on the ground. 4.5 yards per rush attempt allowed, ranks 19th, whereas the 5.6 yards per pass attempt that they've allowed so far, Chicago ranks 6th. So challenging day for Stafford to work with some pretty low-end receivers. Caleb comes in completing just 59% of his passes, but at least he's throwing the ball a significant amount of the time, and presumably there's an upward trajectory as he finds his footing in the league and hopefully continues to grow. The game last week getting up over 300 yards is very encouraging on his the pass attempts that he threw. 8.4 intended air yards per attempt, just 3.3 completed air yards per attempt, 5.3 yards per attempt overall, just the 2 TDs to the 4 interceptions. Some growing to do, statistically especially. But there's a lot of talent there in any given slate, and he projects out fairly well. Stafford's throwing for 250 yards a game, 2 touchdowns on the board, just 2 touchdowns against 1 interception, but pretty low end overall. 33 attempts, the volume is there, but the talent in the receiver corps is really limited at this point. Next game up, we're dealing with the Jordan Love situation. He's practicing on a limited basis. Jordan Love on one side and surging Sammy Darnold on the other side. It's an interesting enough game, especially given some of the skill players, the incredibly deep wide receiver core for the Packers. I don't mind either side of this one, but I want Jordan Love to play. If it's Malik Willis again, I'm a little bit less interested. Just really like the talent level with Jordan Love. The one game he played, threw the ball 34 times, 260 yards, 2 touchdown passes. Again, 4 or 5 significant pieces in terms of the pass catchers on that team. A good pass catching running back. 4 at least good pass catching wide receivers, workable tight ends. It's a very, very deep offense for DFS, and basically everybody gets at least a couple of looks. Everybody gets at least a couple shots, maybe not each week, but over the course of the season and over the course of our DFS volume, everybody in that offense gets some looks. Just need the quarterback back. Nice deep shots, too. 9.2 intended air yards per attempt in that game. Darnold has played 3. He's leading the slate with 8 touchdown passes on the board so far against 2 interceptions. 7.1 intended air yards per attempt, completing 8.4 yards per pass attempt, a solid 5.3 air yards per attempt overall. 68% of 26 passes a game has been, just a little bit more of an efficient game manager throwing some touchdowns than he's been like a standout throwing the ball 40, 50 times. He's maxed out in his most recent game was 28 pass attempts. That was the highest on the season so far. But 2 touchdowns and an interception game 1, 2 touchdowns and an interception game 2, and then 4 touchdowns last week. That'll do nicely for a DFS score at cheap pricing. He's got weapons to work with. He's playing well. He came into the season with like a little bit of they like him buzz. They brought him here to be the backup for a reason, and he got thrust into the starting job. Let's see what he can do kind of a situation. Once upon a time was supposed to be very good at this. Stranger things than have happened than a late career surge from a 27-year-old quarterback. For his career, we maxed out at 19 touchdown passes with the Jets back in 2019. He threw for 3,024 yards that year. That was also a career high. 13 interceptions, tied for his career high, tied for second in his career. He threw 15 as a rookie the year before. Completed 61.9% of his passes, excluding this year's short sample. That's a career high as well. 6.9 yards per pass attempt. That's actually not a career high. He completed with Carolina in 2022, 8.2 yards per pass attempt. He played 6 games that year, threw 140 passes, 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, 8.2 per attempt, 3 interceptions. I mean, look, the guy lost his starting gig basically as a 24-year-old. And, it's not like he was playing on good teams. He was drafted 3rd overall. There's at least the idea that some of what we've seen with Darnold this year is real. I think he's highly playable. He's still pretty cheap. Ranks 3rd on DK by points per dollar, 6th on FanDuel by points per dollar. If Love plays, he's number 4 and number 2 by points per dollar, and both guys rank out in the top 10 by raw points. Both stacks rank out pretty well. Minnesota leading slightly across the categories, but both very much in play. I think I favor the depth chart a little bit on the Green Bay side. It's just deeper. I like working with those options where I know 1 or 2 of those receivers are going to be too low owned. And then you just, you're taking your shots. You're taking your shots with wide receivers anyway. So why not do it on a team where I believe in the down depth chart talent and I can get to a wide receiver 4 who might see the same 3 or 4 targets that a wide receiver, 3 on another team might on any given slate and come away with a completely unowned good receiver in a good spot. Jordan Addison still questionable on the Minnesota side, also adds a little bit of a layer. He was limited at practice today. One to keep an eye on, but seems like maybe we're trending in the right direction. That would obviously be a big boost. If it's not him, it's Jalen Naylor back in that wide receiver 2 role. Kind of diminishes them a little bit, but obviously they just got away with a 4-touchdown game for Sam Darnold last week with that situation. So I think it's workable. Brock Purdy, also injured. He practiced, I believe, on a limited basis here. Full practice on Wednesday. So it seems like Purdy will be fine. Sore back. That's what happens when you got to carry the team, Brock. Niners obviously still reeling from injuries, but not really. It's more of they got punched in the face 4 times and they're just sitting there smiling at you kind of situation because they look pretty damn good. They're favored by 10.5 in this one against New England, who has looked pretty bad. 41-point total, most of it going in the Niners' direction. We obviously had the huge game out of Juwan Jennings. They've still got Brandon Ayuk as a premium weapon there. It's just a next man up situation with their absurd depth. So we'll see what happens with Debo is doubtful. Kittle is questionable. McCaffrey's obviously still out. But weapons galore still on this team. Jordan Mason looks like one of the best running backs in football. It's just a good football team. I would still lean Ayuk. I know a lot of people are buzzy about Juwan Jennings and how good he looked, and we talked about him going into that one, but Ayuk is the more established, clear number one. The separation numbers, he's leading the league in separation yards per attempt and a couple other key metrics for looking for wide receivers. Just a little bit of underperformance, but I am not worried. So I would just go right back to that well. And honestly, if Jennings catches up to him in any kind of ownership exposures, it's easy to go the other direction. Purdy ranks as QB 11, 12, and QB 13, 18 across sites. The stack ranks out very, very well because of all that skill player scoring potential. Part of that is floated by Mason. Mason on his own is a reasonable standalone running back option against the New England defense, although they are allowing just 3.7 yards per attempt to rank 5th so far. 6.8 yards per attempt through the air. Definitely a team that San Francisco can exploit. Might not be a game where they need to do very much, so it's another reason I could see feeding Mason the ball and just burning some clock and kind of running this one out with a small lead. 41-point total, not all that appealing, but obviously a very good team. Jacoby Brissett presumably back at the helm for New England. I say presumably because he yielded in the fourth quarter when they were getting just completely destroyed by the Jets. Drake May came in for a little bit. Wasn't any better. Brissett ended up throwing for 98 yards and no scores, no interceptions, at least 12 of 18, but not a good performance by anything related to the New England Patriots in that last one against the Jets. And really, we're probably in for more of the same going up against San Francisco. So far this year, San Francisco's defense has allowed 4.5 yards per rush attempt to rank 21st, 8.1 yards per pass attempt to rank 30th. If you think that's where they finished this week against New England, I've got a bridge to sell you. Major Hurricane Helene intensifies ahead of Florida landfall. Who could have seen that coming? The Gulf of Mexico is only 95 degrees warm. Go figure. Why do these storms get so much stronger? I can't figure it out. Anyway, this one looks like San Francisco all the way. Really not even that many good bring back options from New England. Maybe you get away with a cheap receiver in there somewhere. Maybe you get away with a Ramondre. Ramondre's involved enough in the passing game that he can be part of New England stacks. He obviously had a messy game. The lead receiver is Demario Douglas on that offense. Like, what is overly appealing there? Cheap tight end, maybe. But those aren't ideal bring back plays. And this isn't an ideal game with just a 41-point total to even chase that. So limited options from New England. Derek Carr, last week's big letdown boy, coming back against Atlanta in a game that has skill players on every corner and 2 very competent quarterbacks. I actually feel like this could have been totaled in, more toward the mid-40s. Wouldn't have shocked me at all. Seems like a reasonable place to mine at least some skill player options. And I think we can probably get away with stacks. The stacks rank out a little bit better than the quarterbacks do, kind of floated by the skill players on both sides. Right, the quarterbacks just 16, 19, and 18, 23 for Carr, 18, 18, and 20, 20 for Cousins. No real appeal there. But when they jump as part of a stack into these levels, there's value there, there's points per dollar there, there's scoring value there. Carr obviously floated a little bit by Alvin Kamara's raw projection, but he's got a couple very, very good receivers. Had a great downfield connection in 2 out of the first 3 games with Rashid Shaheed. He's got Chris Olave to work with. A lot of weapons for Carr. And a fair number of weapons for Kirk Cousins on his side. So that's one that, again, I think this could go a little higher than Vegas might be looking at. I'd be maybe keying in on a little bit of an over there. And just expectations of fairly priced QBs being able to lead their good groups of skill players and have their own scores elevated through correlation. As far as the defenses go, 4.1 yards allowed per rush attempt, ranks 9th for Atlanta so far, but we'll see what they can do against Kamara. 5.8 yards per pass attempt, ranks 7th. Atlanta's been a pretty decent defense, so it could be another situation where Carr just kind of runs into a wall. And again, last week he came out in a spot that I liked quite a bit. I was talking about quite a bit for him to come out and have another good game. Put up 142 yards on 14 of 25, a touchdown and an interception. Really disappointing game against a bad Eagles defense. I thought they were going to hold their own in that one, especially because it was a weird game for Hurts on the other side. Hurts threw for a bunch of yards, uncharacteristic number of yards for him, but just didn't work out. 243 yards, 2 touchdowns in week 2 for him on just 11 of 16 passing. A couple real deep shots there. 19 of 23 in week 1, 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. So we're not seeing a ton of volume for Carr, which does kind of temper the expectation for the stack and for the individual quarterback score a little bit. But again, if it does catch the wave of this game just being a little bit better and some of those skill players making things happen out there, he can definitely get lofted up to more attempts in a high-scoring game. He should be completing a fair number of his passes so far for the year. We're at 69% on just 21 attempts per game, but 6 touchdown passes. Cousins, a little bit slow out of the gate, 67% of his passes completed so far. He's thrown 4 TDs, 3 interceptions. Kind of came to life in that game-winning drive the other day. We'll see what he's got. I'm not, that was the game against Philly. The game against KC, 20 of 29, 230 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. I'm not writing Kirk Cousins off. I'm really not even reducing expectations for him, despite not throwing for 300 yards yet, not throwing for a big touchdown performance yet. I really like what he was doing at the beginning of last season before the injury, and I'm kind of willing to ride on that expectation a little bit longer, just given the skill players involved in Atlanta. A lot of weapons for him to work with there. So that's a reasonable spot to target on both sides, I think. Probably not a spot where you want either of those quarterbacks on their own, of course, but as correlated options, they work a lot better. Philly and Tampa Bay, another close game in Vegas, just a 2.5-point spread in Tampa Bay. Philly favored on the road, so obviously a little bit going in Philly's direction more in terms of taking the home field away. 6:30. 43.5-point total there. Hurts ranks out fairly well, 4th and 6th by points on DraftKings and FanDuel, respectively. 9th overall by points per dollar. Not a bad option at all, and the stack ranks out very well. The things that you got to watch in this game, though, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, both questionable, and then on the other side, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, both questionable. So just keep an eye on practice status. We had A.J.'s missed 2. His report today didn't practice. Devonta had a concussion. He hasn't practiced yet this week either. Looking pretty ugly for both of them. Britton Covey also got put on the IR. So they're potentially very, very limited at the wide receiver spot. You could be looking at a day of, Dotson. Oh, here's a good list. Dotson, Johnny Wilson, Paris Campbell as your top 3 wide receivers for Philly. Bearing in mind that they've got a weapon that has been the best in fantasy football this season in Saquon Barkley, could just be a day where Philly lives on the ground. So far this season, Tampa's given up 4.9 yards per rush attempt. That plays into that narrative as well. 26 yards, 26th ranked. 6 yards per pass attempt ranks 12th. Been more vulnerable to the run. I could just see them keeping it on the ground, running a lot with Hurts, putting the ball in Saquon's hand, running some little bubble screens and not really throwing the ball down the field all that much. It could be a slightly deceptive game on the Philly side. Baker Mayfield had that great week 1, and then 2 kind of okay games. Second game, 185 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, but he ran one in, so his fantasy score was all right, but not really as a quarterback leads his wide receiving core to prominence like he did in week 1. Week 1 completed 24 of 30 through 4 touchdown passes. Had a monster day. The stack with him and Evans and Godwin was Slate winning that day. 25 of 33 in week 3, completed 1 touchdown pass, 1 interception, just 163 yards. Most concerningly in that one, just 4.9 yards per pass attempt. That was way different than the 9.6 and 9.7 he had put up in weeks 1 and 2. But assuming his guys are there, premium downfield options in both of those targets. Let me pull up the reporting for them. Evans both of them, limited participants in practice today. So keep an eye on them tomorrow, but at least the 2 Bucs receivers trending in the right direction, the 2 Eagles receivers trending in the wrong direction. Significant spots to watch. Just put some numbers on it quick. I know we are short on time, 6:34. Keeping an eye on it. So 6 touchdowns on the year for Baker. He has completed 74% of his passing, but it's a little bit more limited, 27 attempts per game, where Jalen's thrown the ball 34 times a game. He's completed 71% of his attempts. He's thrown for 250 yards plus, 3 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. The offense kind of a work in progress there in Philly. And again, if you take away his 2 best weapons in the passing attack, you're down to Dallas Goedert, I forgot to mention, at the tight end position. So you've got him, you got Saquon, and then a really limited wide receiver core. Could have an impact. Baker, a 5.2 intended air yards per attempt, completing 7.8 yards per attempt overall. Hurts is throwing the ball down the field a little bit more at 6.8 intended air yards per attempt. Both guys can obviously get out and throw the ball, though. Speaking of downfield shots, Anthony Richardson. It's about all he's been good for this season so far. 3 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions. But he's completed 8 yards per pass attempt, 12.6 intended air yards per pass attempt. Dude can sling the ball. Looks to connect with those downfield weapons. The downside, he's completed just 49% of his pass attempts this year, 194 yards a game. Again, 6 interceptions, 24 attempts per game, so not exactly firing the ball around all that much. He's running a little bit, 6 attempts per game. He's putting up 6.5 yards per attempt, 39 yards per game. He scored on the ground once, but there's obviously going to be more to come. That is a big skill set for him. But what we need to see is an improvement in both the volume and the volume of completions. I'll take just a few more completions because some of the incompletes, some of the misconnections do come just by nature of the downfield operation that this team runs. But you got to give me more than 50. You got to get into the low 60s, really. If you're in the low 60s, we can work with the downfield attack. If you're in the low 60s, we can work with your rushing ability. If you're not going to give me even 50%, we have a bit of a problem. So questions abound about Richardson, but none of them are about his talent. Slate breaking ability. 4 or 5 touchdown pass ability, 3 touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns kind of ability, 100 plus yards on the ground. Multiple 100 yards through the air kind of games. It's all in play for that quarterback. He's only he's only 6,300 on DraftKings, 75 on FanDuel. Ranks 12-16 on DK, 14-17 on FanDuel. Lands slightly better on the DraftKings slate, but not by much. On the other side of that one, Justin Fields, who could have been the mold for a lot of what I was just describing about Anthony Richardson, with a little bit less of an arm. Not anyone's favorite option, I don't think, outside of maybe Pittsburgh. They've been winning football games with Justin Fields against all odds. He ranks 14-10, 16-10 across sites. The stack ranks 19-12 and 22-18. Might be a spot maybe you look at the Pittsburgh rushing game a little bit. Really don't love it as a passing attack. Indy's been vulnerable to both. 4.4 yards ranks in the middle of the league allowed on the ground. 6.7 yards, same thing, and through the air. Pittsburgh's defense has been quite a bit better. 3.5 yards ranks second against the run. 5.9 yards per pass attempt ranks 10th. So they've been a fairly stout defense. I do think that's in play against Richardson, especially with all the picks in the air. Not a bad defense to mine this week. As far as stacking up, grabbing skill players, much, much more in favor of the Indy offense. You get a reasonably talented receiving core to work with there. And you get those big home run shots, right? So Michael Pittman's in play, Alec Pierce is in play, Josh Downs is going to be back out there, Adonai Mitchell in a more limited sense, further down the depth chart and more limited by the return of Downs last week is Ashton Doolin probably get a look. I don't even know if he got targeted last week. I haven't looked at it yet. But there are get up, get down the field, and hope that he gets the ball near you kind of options in this receiving core. They've got a very good running back in Jonathan Taylor. So it plays okay, but it is a good Pittsburgh defense that they're going to throw into. And then on the Pittsburgh side, Najee Harris, if Jalen Warren doesn't go, what's the latest on Jalen? Yeah, Jalen's still questionable, which didn't practice today, so he was trending down. I took him out of the projections earlier today. Still questionable. Wanted to make sure he didn't get ruled out during the afternoon. But if he doesn't go, then that does lead to maybe some Najee shares. And it would take away for me, any random interest in the Pittsburgh passing attack. If they can just consolidate all that rushing opportunity into Najee and just feed him the ball against a gettable rush defense, I kind of like that situation. He's 66 on FanDuel. He's 56 on DraftKings. I haven't ranked the running back position yet. But seems like an affordably good upside spot. George Pickens in the wide receiver position. Pat Freiermuth are really the two appealing pass targets. And then Cordero Patterson's probably going to get a little bit of attention, a couple of touches. And we know how explosive he can be on the right day. So it doesn't project out through the roof, but as a potential value option is just a dart throw. 47 on FanDuel as a running back, 43 on DraftKings. It's a playable piece. So just that goes off the board completely if Jalen Warren plays, by the way. But if he doesn't, it's one to consider. I think they're more individually and more focused on the rushing game for Pittsburgh than as a full stack, playable stack. And then rounding things off, the last game of this main slate before we dive into tonight's showdown action. Appreciate everybody who's been here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Juicy one down here at the bottom. One of the reasons I like that it's alphabetical this week. Washington and Arizona, the highest total on the board at 50 points. These quarterbacks, Kyler Murray ranks 1-1 on DraftKings for just 6,800, going up against one of the worst pass defenses in football this year and last year. He ranks 1-4 on FanDuel. Jaden Daniels ranks 2-2 on DraftKings and 2-3 on FanDuel, going up against a pass defense that has been equally bad, with the bonus that his rushing game gets to go up against a rush defense that's been completely inept so far this year. Vegas loves this one for scoring. It's just a 3.5 point spread in Arizona. They're favored, but just by 3.5 points at home. Obviously not a lot of difference between these two squads. Both quarterbacks project out very, very well. Kyler projects out slightly more. I think both these guys land in the above section. I believe I've got them slightly ahead of some other places. As a stack, Arizona ranks 2 across the board on the FanDuel slate. They're being outdone by C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans. On DraftKings, it's the same thing, 2 across the board. They're outdone by points-wise, C.J. Stroud and the Texans, and then points per dollar, actually, Brock Purdy and the Niners, with some of those cheap Niner skill players getting involved on DK. But Arizona looks pretty fantastic. Washington, again, 5.1 yards per rush attempt ranks 29th, 8 yards per pass attempt ranks 29th, and they were not good on defense. Last year, they were an exploitable defense that we targeted again and again with passing games. We're going to do that all year this year. I said it week 1. Kyler's throwing the ball nearly 30 times a game. We'd like to see a little bit of increased volume, but he's thrown 5 touchdown passes so far against 1 interception. Very solid 9.5 yard intended air yards per attempt, completing 7.4 yards per attempt. He's run the ball a handful of times per game, 5 times a game, averaging 10.7 yards per rush attempt, 53.7 yards so far per game on the ground. No touchdowns yet on the ground. Jaden's run the ball in 3 times so far. He's running it 12.5 times a game, putting up basically the same yardage, 57 yards a game versus the 54 that Kyler's putting up. 4.5 yards per rush attempt versus the 10.7. A little bit of a difference there, but it's obviously on more attempts. This would get chopped down for Kyler Murray. He's not going to do that all year. Jaden's been good throwing the ball so far. 25 pass attempts per game. He's completed 80% of them. 221 yards, 2 touchdown passes. You'd like to see more getting into the end zone. When you've got limited targets to work with, though, it can happen. He threw both of those touchdown passes last week against Cincy. 21 of 23 in a tremendous performance as far as efficiency goes. 91.3% of his pass attempts. He also rushed for 39 yards, carried the ball 12 times, and scored on the ground as well. So counted for 3 touchdowns. Pretty solid performance. Coming back in the most highly total game of the week. I just love that spot. I think it's really interesting. I expect it's going to be popular. Probably more popular than he would have been in this exact situation last week. He's got everybody's attention. But a good option. I like the rushing game there. I like Brian Robinson Jr. I think they've got workable pieces in Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown, and Zach Ertz. And then, some ancillary parts if you go way down the depth chart in a super large field tournament. But both sides of that this last Washington-Arizona game look really appealing. They rank out strongly for stacks. On the Washington side, they rank out as stack 11 by points, but 3 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 12 and 5 on the FanDuel slate. So pretty primo options there. That's our main slate. Went 15 minutes longer than I intended to, but that's not bad. We're non-tragic still. Talk our way through this Giants game. We'll do that in quick fashion. Watch this little miracle. If I can find the game. There it is. Look at that. There's all our skill players. Everybody's even ranked together team by team. Happy that actually worked out. I'm going to hide these columns because we don't need them for the showdown game. And it pulls some of our stats columns over there a little bit more. How you guys doing out there? Everybody still with me? I wish there was like a little button I could hear hitting, like have you guys chime in. Like, yeah, we're still here. Handful of people hanging out. Appreciate you guys. Hit the like, hit the subscribe as we dive into tonight's game. Two pretty targetable defenses. I think Dallas's numbers definitely improve as the season goes along. They've allowed 5.4 yards per rush attempt, 32nd ranked, and 7.4 yards per pass attempt, ranks 25th. They were last season a good scoring defense. If you look at the numbers, they were allowing last year 4.2 yards per rush attempt and under a touchdown per game, but just under a touchdown per game on the ground. Through the air, 6.5 yards per pass attempt and touchdown and a third, basically, through the air. So kind of middle of the road numbers, but they were a good scoring defense in terms of creating turnovers, some pick sixes, coming up with some good DFS days as a defense. And I could absolutely see that happening with Daniel Jones at the helm here. Danny Dimes has a penchant for throwing the ball to the other team, in addition to just being bad. So not a bad opportunity to find some scoring defense with Dallas. So far this season, they're coming with a 28.9% blitz rate, and they're gaining pressure 41% of the time. Come away with 7 sacks and 3 interceptions. That's where a lot of the scoring defense can come from. It can also, when you're blitzing that much and pressuring the quarterback that much, it can also create opportunities for the offense. Daniel Jones not the quarterback to go find and exploit those opportunities more often than not. So Dallas defense definitely going to be in play. They're drawing a little bit of ownership in captain roles. They're drawing a lot of ownership in flex roles. Definitely worth considering at 5,400, 9,000 as a way to get us started on a showdown slate. On the other side of that one, the Giants defense, not quite the same thing. So far this season, the Giants D has blitzed 34.2% of the time. They've gained 27% pass pressure rate. They've come up with 14 sacks. Is that right? Maybe they are a better defense than I thought. Do they really have 14 sacks? I missed that. Yeah, 13.46% sack rate. Ranks second in the league. Good for them. That pass rush is actually coming through. It was like the one thing that we were optimistic about this year. Secondary is allowing a 70% completion rate. They're allowed 6.2 yards per pass attempt so far. That ranks 14. They've been thrown against 30 times a game, right in the middle of the league. They've come away with a 1.1% interception rate, 25th in the league. They rank 27th against the run, 5 yards per rush attempt. Giving up 130 plus yards per game on the ground, ranks 23rd. Haven't given up many rushing touchdowns, though. 0.3 touchdowns per game on the ground, ranks second. So a little bit of bend, don't break, maybe, for the Giants' rush defense. And then a little bit of idea that maybe they can put some pressure on Dak. Maybe create some scoring events. To me, that just leads to Dak. Maybe he's going to be a little bit rushed, but there'll be created opportunities down the field and throw against a weak secondary, and Dak is more than talented enough to get the ball out against this team. So far this season, he's thrown the ball 40 times a game, completing 61% of his passes for 280 yards and change, throwing for more yards than most of the quarterbacks in the league. He's completed 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 7 yards per pass attempt. Nothing wrong with any of these numbers. It's just typical Dak Prescott output. 9 intended air yards per pass attempt. Has very good weapons to work with in CeeDee Lamb, one of the best receivers in the league. Jake Ferguson, a tremendous pass-catching tight end. He's got Brandon Cooks as a veteran receiver. They're working in Jalen Tolbert and Kavonta Turpin. I don't know what. I almost said Avonta Erpin. Just leaving off all the first letters. Kavonta Turpin, a little bit more this year at cheap prices. So for showdown slates, you've got interesting like downboard, cheaper, lower-owned weapons to work with in showdown builds. They've got a dual-headed running back, but more of the volume went toward Rico Dowdle in their most recent game. They had a very limited, I mentioned it earlier in the show, they had very limited rush opportunities overall in that one. Last time out against Baltimore, Dak threw the ball 51 times. 379 yards in a monster performance as far as yardage goes, 7.4 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interception in a decent effort. Not outstanding. You need one more touchdown there, gets you to outstanding in terms of passing, but he did run one in. He ran the ball 2 times for 7 yards and scored on the ground. So very good game DFS-wise for Dak. Just 67 yards and 4 completions to CeeDee. Week before, CeeDee had 90 yards also on 4 catches, scored a touchdown. He was targeted 7 times in each game, but that's for him kind of limited volume, especially considering how many times they threw the ball. For him to only come away with 7 targets, it's a little bit surprising there. But overall, obviously a superstar receiver. I guess I got the snap count hidden. In terms of the targets per game, 8 of them have gone in CeeDee's direction. Ferguson pulling in 8 targets a game. He's played twice, 5 targets in the first game, and then he picked up 11 targets in that game. He was the favored target out of those 51 pass attempts. Caught 6 of them for 95 yards, failed to score, but a solid tight end game nonetheless. The lead tight end option and a very, very strong receiver and a very strong candidate for a lot of shares on a showdown slate. Definitely an interesting player. Big target in the red zone. Guy they're going to throw some touchdown passes to this year. In terms of air yards downfield option, not really, a major threat, but a 7.4 yard ADOT. He's getting downfield a little bit, 11% of the air yards so far. CeeDee's racked up 25.8% on an 11.5 yard ADOT. Pretty solid numbers for CeeDee. I mentioned Dowdle picked up more of the volume, though. That's where I was at when I got swung back into the pass attempts. He carried the ball just 8 times in week 3. 7 times in week 2, 8 times in week 1. But where I mean that he picked up a little bit was his 8 carries in week 2, or his 7 carries rather in week 2 was compared to 6 carries for Zeke. And in week 1, his 8 carries were compared to 10 carries for Zeke. In week 3, Zeke carried the ball just 3 times. He was targeted twice, caught 1 of them. Dowdle was targeted 5 times, caught 3 of them. So that is a touch advantage that is growing in Rico Dowdle's favor, which is kind of how this was looked at coming into the season. Everybody can see that Zeke, we're relatively washed. 3.3 yards per rush attempt so far. Not that Dowdle's been all that much better this year, 3.8 yards per attempt. He's carried the ball 7.7 times a game, 2.1 yards before contact, 1.7 after. And that's where he gains a little bit of distinction, 1.9 and 1.4 so far for Zeke. Zeke has the rushing touchdown. He's probably going to be a factor for poaching touchdowns through the season. Once they get in close, hand the ball to Zeke and plow through for 2 yards, kind of a carry. But as far as a lead DFS option, as far as something that's necessarily worth 11.5 when his direct competitor is only cost $8,000 on the FanDuel slate, that's a little bit of an awkward fit. DK got it right. Dowdle 64, Zeke 62. So this becomes interesting on FanDuel at 11.5 just because of the nature of Showdown. He's going to be low owned at that big of a cost. If he happens to fall into the end zone once, maybe even twice with the ball in his hands, that could be a difference maker at low ownership in a flex spot. So big cost to do it with, low volume, limited opportunity. But as far as showdown slate dart throws go, you could probably do worse than spending that money on Zeke Elliott to differentiate a lineup. Brendan Aubrey, one of the top kickers in football. Tremendous option, so much so that I actually put the shot of his game log in here. He's already kicked 10 field goals on the season. 4 in week 1, 4 in week 2, 2 last week. It's perfect on field goals, perfect on extra points. He's already got 5 field goals of more than 50 yards. He's really good. Big leg. Might be an opportunity to kick a few here. 45.5 point total, 5.5 point spread against the Giants. If New York keeps this one close, if they are gaining pressure on Dak, shutting down the run game a little bit, and Dak just doesn't find the connection down the field with the receivers, you could see it leading to another game where Aubrey kicks 3 or 4 field goals and gets involved for scoring. He's going to be popular just like the Dallas defense is. Neither of those things is a secret on this slate. People are going to want to play those two things in this game, and kickers have been involved in early season showdown results. So I think it juices up his ownership expectations. Definitely in play, but know that it's going to come with some popularity and some likelihood of dupes and not a lot of leverage against the slate. Cooks on the season. I know people are interested in him. Drawing 5 targets a game so far. 19.07% of the air yards on a solid 13.6 average depth of target. So they're taking downfield shots. He's gotten one in the end zone. He scored in week 1, 4 catches, 40 yards on 7 targets. Just 2 catches, 19 yards on 2 targets in week 2, and then just 2 catches on 6 targets, just 16 yards in week 3. The volume and the output can really come and go with Brandon Cooks. But if Dak's going to throw the ball another 50-plus times, or even 40-plus times, you got to like Cooks to pick up his 5 targets, and then it just comes down to what do the results look like. As long as we're getting the 5-target volume, we're okay to go to that receiver. And again, especially in a showdown format, basically everything's in play. Tolbert targeted 5 times last week, 9 times in week 2. He had a big week 2, 6 catches for 82 yards. He caught 3 balls for 42 in week 3, but he got in the end zone. So he's been very involved. Ran 45 routes in week 3. It's a growing route share, 21, 38, and 45 over the first 3 weeks. Been an effective player for them. He's also a player who can get involved just with the skill set that he's got. Put the ball in his hands in short opportunities and just let him break something. It's the same thing with the hell is he? There he is. With Kevonta Turpin. Turpin's actually gotten a couple carries. 2 rushing attempts on the season, just 2 yards and a yard. He's gotten targeted a few times in the offense. 4 times in week 2. He caught 2 of them for 4 yards, and then 3 times in week 3. Caught all 3 of them for 51 yards and a touchdown. So it's limited snap volume for Turpin. But again, since we are talking about a showdown slate rather than a full main slate where that just gets chewed up by other guys who are at similar prices getting more opportunities, Turpin only played 15 snaps with the offense last week. But again, 3 targets, 3 catches, 51 yards, and a touchdown with game-breaking ability. That's all I really need for a very cheap price. Another guy that's not a secret. With Ferguson back, Luke Schoonmaker fell back to just 1 catch, 5 yards, 2 targets. He'll be out there, but not going to be heavily involved. Nobody downboard, really. Deuce Vaughn carried the ball twice last week, 5 yards, caught 1 of 2 targets. Jalen Brooks, 1 of 3. 1 of 3 in week 2, 1 of 1 in week 1. Very limited looks in his direction. And then nothing else really noteworthy downboard, other than the fact that this game includes a Brevin Span-Ford and a Bryce Ford-Wheaton, apparently. Wouldn't expect either one of those guys to get involved at all at $205,000. On the Giants side, it's Danny Dimes and Malik Neighbors show with a little bit of Devin Singletary sprinkled on top. Maybe you get some Giants defense in there, given the blitz rate and the success getting to the quarterback so far this season. But it is not a good defense. I think it's a little bit deceptive. Might create some sack-based scoring while also giving up 40 points and just kind of erasing any scoring that he actually did. So kind of limited. Not really a big fan of the Giants defense. Between the two, definitely more actual touchdown scoring, pick six, scoop six type scoring on the Dallas side for sure. But Malik Neighbors has been absolutely fantastic. Total revelation in this Giants attack so far. In week 1, it was a little bit of a underwhelming performance. He was targeted 7 times. He caught 5 of them for 66 yards in his debut. Wasn't happy coming out of that game with the volume, and he spoke to the press about it. They came out in week 2 and targeted him 18 times. Completed 10 of them because it's Daniel Jones throwing to him. Any other quarterback would have probably completed 15. He had 127 yards and a touchdown. Improved on the touchdown output in week 3. He was targeted 12 times, caught 8 of them, so a better percentage. 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. It amounted to 6.5 yards per target in that one. 7.1 yards per target in week 2. 9.4 yards per target in week 1. He is the absolute clear-cut go-to option on offense for the Giants, and it's really him and only him. He's made Daniel Jones look a little bit better, like I said, making circus catches on some of these errant throws that Jones puts up. But he's getting the job done, even with Danny Dimes thrown to him. For Jones's part, completing 60% of his passes, he's throwing 35 times a game. That's, around the volume that we want, but we're about 10 points shy on the completion percentage. He does have a little bit of rushing ability that you can always go to. He's run the ball just 6.3 times per game, though. 3.5 yards per attempt, 22 yards a game. Hasn't run one in yet, but has that ability. We've seen him pad stats that way in the past. 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on the year, just 5.8 yards per pass attempt. Kind of limited. They've put the ball in neighbors' hands out of the backfield, but where you want him, obviously, is in the passing game. He has a dominant 56.97% of the Giants' air yards so far, putting up 90 yards a game, 8.5 yard ADOT, 3 touchdowns so far. Devin Singletary in the ground game is very involved. He's the lead back by a wide margin on this team. We have Tyrone Tracy as a limited volume backup, but most of it's going in Singletary's direction. He's been all right. He's been Devin Singletary. It's basically exactly what you expect. 14, 15 carries a game, 65, 70 yards a game. Maybe he gets in the end zone, maybe he doesn't. He's mediocre, but he's been okay. 4.7 yards per attempt, 65.7 yards per game, 1.7 before contact, 3 yards after contact is nice. A little bounce in his game. 2 touchdowns on the season. Last week he had a touchdown. He had back-to-back rushing touchdowns, 16 carries each week. 95 yards in week 2 with a touchdown, 65 yards in week 3 with a touchdown. Week 3, he added 43 yards through the air, though, caught 4 of 4 passes. So we were over 100 yards from scrimmage. Can't really argue with that performance. Limited output, though, in weeks 1 and 2 that are a little bit more Devin Singletary-esque. And as I pointed out a few times, this is a name that everybody knows, but it's a running back who's never had more than 870 yards in a season. 188 carries for 870 and 7 touchdowns in 2021 with Buffalo was his peak. 898 yards. That was last year with Houston. 4 touchdowns that year. The 7 TDs caught my eye. So has never rushed for 900, let alone 1,000 yards in a season. This year, 197 so far over 3 games. Got a shot. But not a premium running back by any stretch of the imagination. 8,200, 12,000. He's in play because it's a showdown. There is touchdown upside there for sure. But overall, as far as a talent goes, kind of limited. That also speaks to the quality of the rest of this Giants lineup. Wan'Dale Robinson, 48, 10,000 across sites. Wan'Dale, where are you, Wan'Dale? Where are you? You're going to have to search? There he is. He's under Greg Joseph, whose stats I did not bother to put in here. Wan'Dale caught 7 balls on 8 targets for 61 yards, kind of an empty 61 yards in week 3 against Cleveland, but at least was targeted in that passing game. In week 2, he was one of the most frequently targeted Giants not named Malik Neighbors. He only came away with 4 targets. He caught 2 of them, 18 yards, but he did score. Kind of a scoring-dependent receiver, but he's probably going to be the true number 2 wide receiver option. 6 to 8 targets. Maybe he gets one of them in the end zone. As far as relevant Giants wide receivers, he'd be the next man up. Darius Slayton has established questionable, dealing with a thumb injury. He was targeted just twice last week, caught 1 of them for 7 yards, targeted 4 times in each of the first 2 games, 3 catches a game, under 35 yards in both games, yet to get into the end zone this season. A limited overall receiver, just $32.75, so a nice price savings from Wan'Dale, but that feels like a spot where a lot of people will make that pivot, and Slayton probably ends up over-owned for the talent and for the opportunity, especially when he's dealing with an injury to one of his hands, and typically you're catching the ball with your hands if you're a wide receiver. Not sure how you guys do it. Some guys do it with their helmet, especially on the Giants. 14.5 yards, air yards, 14.5% of the air yards so far on a 9.8 yard ADOT for Darius Slayton. He is a capable enough downfield guy on the right moment. couple of looks per game, but limited volume, limited skill, and again, remember who's delivering him the football. Theo Johnson got more involved. He was kind of interesting just because he came in and just took this tight end job. And he's been out there for the majority of the snaps by a pretty wide margin. Last week, 55 snaps with the offense. Daniel Bellinger, the incumbent, played 26. And then Chris Manhertz played 27. So clearly, the lead tight end and the guy who's on the field for most of the offense. He drew 3 targets in week 3, which is a nice bounce back because he went untargeted in week 2. Ran 15 routes on 40 snaps that week. That was coming off of a 4-target game in week 1. That was what made him interesting. 59 snaps, he ran 31 routes, was targeted on 4 of them, 12.9%. Did nothing with it. He caught 1 pass for 18 yards. Caught 1 of 3 for 13 yards in week 3. So for following the pattern, he goes back to 0 targets. But my hope is that we get 3 to 5 targets, maybe a look in the red zone. They did look his way in the red zone in week 3. He did not convert, but the fact that they looked is at least encouraging. And tight ends are frequently keys on showdown slates. 2,400, 6,000 on a day where everybody's going to be looking toward the Dallas tight end might make Theo Johnson a little bit interesting. And as far as, I was saying for several of these things, that's no secret. I don't know that Theo Johnson is a complete secret. I don't even know if it's a good secret, even if it is a secret. It's not exactly the hot gossip of the week. But give me 3 to 5 targets from a sneaky cheap tight end on a showdown slate. Even if people know, even if he gets buzzy, it's still not going to be popular. So a little bit of upside there. Got to get that red zone target. I don't care. I honestly, on this side of lock, you don't care that if he catches the red zone target. And I said this the other day. It's Schrodinger's red zone target. Or Schrodinger's touchdown is probably the more apt way to put it. Whether or not he gets that target is opening the box. He's either alive or dead when you do it. He's either caught the touchdown or not. I don't care whether he catches the touchdown or not on this side of lock. I care whether he gets the target or not. That's the key factor. If you get the target, your play was the right play. If he catches it, then obviously results-wise, your play was the right play. But if he just gets the target, you've made the right decision for DFS. He just needs to convert, obviously, for you to actually make money off of it. Sometimes it's not enough to just be right. 600 for Jalen Hyatt, who apparently demanded a trade, which is weird for a guy who has just demonstrated no ability to be a good football player in the NFL and thinks he has value. So that's strange, but I would not expect anything out of Jalen Hyatt, even for the low price. He's just a sprint down the field and maybe we'll throw you the ball once and we probably won't put it anywhere near you. And even if we did, you probably wouldn't catch it kind of a player. Maybe he gets out there and tries to do that this week for 600. For 55 on FanDuel, I think it's a joke price. You can see it right there. It's a 32-yard ADOT. He has caught no balls this season. All right, that's what you're buying. He's been targeted twice. He's run 19 routes, 7 in week 1, 6 in each of the last 2 weeks. Played 15, 11, and 10 snaps, so a declining snap share. Playing behind a very good Malik Neighbors and then 2 mediocre guys that he has done nothing to, establish himself as being better than. The good news is he's probably going to get more volume than, say, Bryce Ford Wheaton down here, who's just kind of on the depth chart because he's probably going to be active wearing a uniform. It might not even be, and then he comes out. But as we've established, I think, and anybody who's been here before, just for building lineups, you kind of just want to take anybody projected below a 1-point projection out for showdown slates. Anybody else you can ride with at least a little bit. Like Daniel Bellinger, again, did play a portion of the snaps. He's very cheap. If he picks up a target or two on a showdown slate in limited doses, there's moderate upside. There's same thing with like a Manhertz even, which is really, really stretching it, but he is 200. There's no projection here. He's projected at 1/4 of a point. But you are talking about a guy who was on the field with the offense for 19 snaps in week 1, 23 in week 2, 27 in week 3. He ran 3 routes in week 1, went untargeted. No routes in week 2, 1 route in week 1, and went untargeted. So again, this is not a pass-catching tight end. This is a guy who's out there almost exclusively to block. If he happens to slip out into pass coverage, maybe they look in his direction. But that's not even one where, like, if you get the target, you've done right. That's probably just a mistake, pure and simple. So, but in the Daniel Bellinger department, maybe you got there. Eric Gray, not going to see enough volume. I think he only played with special teams last week. Let's build some lineups. 7:09 on our clocks. This is a, 8:15 start? We got plenty of time. Yeah, 8:15 start time. No issues. So DraftKings first, we'll do our little lineup building exercises here just for the fun of it, basically. See how things look, talk some constructions through, and then we'll look at some of these Ace Mind Sim results. Let me see. How did this FanDuel rerun go? Let's see. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to jump ahead. That is still a shitload of Dak Prescott in there. Spoiler, going to be a lot of Dak in the MVP spot when we get to FanDuel. It's a fair amount of them in the captain spot on DK as well, but dominating the FanDuel shares. Any requests? Devin and Power talking lineup construction a little bit. Building to win or building to cash. Yeah, we're always talking looks to win. You know, when I show a lot of those results, basically the difference being you don't want to necessarily weed out the dupes and look for lower dupes if you're only looking at cash. Not the correct way to go about things, but if you're building like one lineup, then you can play to cash. If you're building, especially if you're building, playing for entertainment purposes, playing to cash, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not the, quote, heavy quotes, correct way to play. If you're looking to, again, heavy quotes, make money. Mamba says you're building for the Dallas destruction, right? Wait, you don't think my Giants hang in this one? I think the Giants lose by 3 touchdowns. I'm going to go with Jake Ferguson in the captain spot just because I want to. And I'm going to give him Dak to work with, but I'll leave CD out of it. I'll go with the obvious guys from the Giants side here to get started. Just to do something popular there, but we've got a differentiated captain already. Leaves us 4,400 a spot. It gives me the Giants kicker, but I don't really want the Giants kicker. I would be interested in the Dallas kicker in this lineup, though. That's kind of... He's going to be popular, but that's not a crazy option. And then it leaves me 39, and there's a billion things that you can work with in very low prices up and down the board like that. Giants D would be a really weird lineup construction to build. It would just be differentiating for differentiation's sake, and it would kind of probably make this a little bit bad. You could give Danny Dimes, Darius Slayton to work with in addition to neighbors there. You could go to Theo Johnson. This would be super low on. This is going to be cheating. That's actually a little bit more dupe than I thought it would be, actually. Wow. Theo's got it at 13. Holy shit. Aubrey might be more popular than I thought. Slayton's going to be 15. Jeez. Just for the hell of it. Even that, wow. Okay. Let's change things up then. We'll go with some Rico. And 25. Go back to Theo and see what that looks like. 19. Man. All right. I'm going to change things up. I want the double quarterback exposure in the flags. If the Giants hang at all, he's going to have to do something as far as scoring goes. I mean, it could technically go through Singletary if it's a low-scoring game on the Dallas side, but I don't think Dallas comes out low-scoring tonight. So I think Daniel Jones has to do something. And just so much history goes through always one, a lot of time two quarterbacks in the flex spots. Let's see what happens if we do that and then lean weaker receivers, I guess. Go Wandale. Jeez. That cuts it to 13. It's a viable lineup. It leaves a ton of money on the table to help differentiate. Sometimes you do gain ground over just the raw number crunching of it, just by the fact that a lot of hand builders just aren't generally inclined to leave that much on the table. And this is a perfectly viable lineup. What if we wanted to go Singletary and that's an interesting one. It's one of the lower owned ones, lower duped ones anyway, that we've seen. Ferg in the captain spot with Dak. Dak also gets Cooks. You throw the Dallas D and Aubrey in there in a Dallas wipeout, which is kind of what Mamba was just asking for. And then you got Singletary, assuming that the Giants' passing attack is just weak and you have to play somebody from the Giants. You could do the same thing. By the same token, you could probably grab the kicker at even lower ownership if you really wanted to get interesting with it. Yeah, that cuts it even further. Obviously, this is giving the Giants no credit whatsoever in this build, and you always, again, want to be telling yourself a little bit of the story of the game that you're building. Well, that would be an interesting approach if you wanted to go Cowboys wipeout. I do like Ferguson in that captain spot. Obviously, CD's going to play very strongly in the captain spot, but we were getting a lot of Dak in that DK sim, even at his somewhat aggressive price. So let's see what that looks like. Let's see if you can get his Dak and CD. It gives you very hefty pricing. And then still try and go Daniel Jones, but I'll go Wandale. 42, we're fine. There's a lane through which you could play the Giants defense against this, especially with that sack rate. And that would be a very low-owned approach, I would expect. Again, another situation where maybe it doesn't on the numbers necessarily come out exactly right. But I think just the Giants D against the quarterback would be a lower-owned approach. We got 48. Can't get Aubrey. You could get Joseph. Got Wandale already. Could get Turpin. Turpin's an interesting way to go, actually. That's not bad. That's playable. Again, Giants D against the captain quarterback. Not completely terrible because even, let's say, Dak throws three touchdown passes. As long as the Giants defense puts a few sacks on the board, you've at least balanced that equation somewhat. It's not ideal, but it could slip through. And it does create a bunch of differentiation if you get there. 44 on the board, though. If you take out Giants D and you want to go a different direction, I mean, you could go something like Darius Slayton and give Danny Dimes 2 of his receivers. For a Dak captain with CD in it, this is not a bad duplicate total at 4.9. If you want to try and force the issue, you got to get really cute with your spending. Now you're down into does Jalen Hyatt get one target down the field kind of territory? Because you can't even really go Theo here at 24 unless you're embracing one of the 2 to 800 kind of options. For argument's sake, let's say he does. And then that gives me Deuce, Belly. I definitely don't like the idea of both of these super low-end pass catchers in the same lineup, so that doesn't work. Everybody else is more expensive. Yeah, this is a combo that really doesn't work out well. Obviously, the way to do it would be to just total faith-based play and somebody from way down here, but I don't think any of those guys are involved enough. You're talking about, if they got one target, it would be a lot. So really difficult to get to this combo. Obviously, that would work the same way with CD in that spot up at the top. Would work the same way with Neighbors up there. The one where you might be able to get away with this configuration is Jones. Because he's a little tiny bit cheaper than everybody else. Buys us a little bit of room. Let's see, what can we do here? You could go Luke Schoonmaker and try and pick up the odd random backup tight end target when the starter is here and fully healthy, but I don't love that. 1450. Again, you can go Vaughn, but yeah, this is limited. If you did the Hyatt thing, then we get 23. You still can't get to Theo. That's a bummer. That would be the way to take that. But again, that would still be low target, low end from that Giants passing attack. That is not a good lineup to build. So even that, yeah, challenging to build with one DK lineup with any combination of these four guys. Basically anything else, I think you can get to. Powers captaining Singletary at 65%. I like that. That's an interesting approach. Why is this points not filling in? I don't know why the points aren't filling in. The ownership is. That table wasn't big enough. All right. Let's look at one of those Singletary captain lineups then. Definitely a viable situation. I mean, there will be volume there, 15 carries and 3 to 5 targets. So as I've said a number of times, as long as I'm getting 18 to 20 potential touches out of a running back, I'll always consider him. And in showdown situations, you have to always consider these guys. So like even Tyrone Tracy as a dart, I kind of skipped over Tracy, but he picked up 5 carries, 23 yards. Also was targeted twice, caught them both for 17 yards. So was his most involvement easily, went up from 10 to 20 snaps last week in week 3. So got on the field a little bit more. So if you get heavily into in a lot of builds, not saying Tracy goes into the captain spot necessarily or really at all, but as a mixer for flex, just with a little bit of touchdown upside. They march down the field, Singletary at the end of the drive is gassed, comes out for a play or two, and kid gets a carry or two or target and breaks one, gets into the end zone for 3 yards and a score. You might want to have it at 2,800. But let's go there. So we'll go there, and we'll go with these two. It's just easy. Actually, let's go differentiated out of the gate. Let's get Jake in there. Not that he's going to be significantly lower owned, but we'll load up with that instead of the CD side of it. And then we've got Singletary, and that'll feed me the Dallas kicking game. You know what? We really haven't included much of the Dallas running game. Let's get Rico in there instead of let's get Cooks and Rico. This is going to be a different approach. And then I got 91 to spend on this spot, so you could go to basically anybody from here down. Unfortunately, you can't get Danny Dimes, but that would be the most popular and obvious way to go with this. Greg Joseph would make sense for this kind of a build, just as far as what the game script would look like, and you're obviously leaving a giant chunk of change on the table. You're under 10 dupes, viable. A little bit of upside, assuming that it's a game in which Singletary is worthwhile having as the captain, then the rest of this plays. If it's a game where Singletary isn't worthwhile having as the captain, then it doesn't matter that the rest of this plays. But in that kind of a game script, double kicker is viable. You could also work either defense into this setup and be perfectly fine. The running back from the other side makes a decent amount of sense. If you wanted to reduce ownership even further, you could go with Zeke. Actually did that. Yeah, slightly. You could go to Zeke. Saves you even more money. So as long as you're working in this kind of a territory with some of the dupes. Let's look at one more because we haven't done this. Double defense would be an interesting way to take this. It's too popular, though. That's viable. That is a playable setup. Let's see if we get Wandale in there instead of Aubrey. He doesn't do anything for us. You'd have to go further down. If you get Slayton in there, maybe. Still pretty popular. These defenses are going to be popular, especially Dallas. Dallas defense and Aubrey are both going to be popular pieces on this. Again, obviously, you could just cheat and be like, oh, Joe and Hyatt, 3 dupes. Congratulations. I don't know who this person I've been, like, theoretically saying is making all these dumb lineups might be, but he's out there. We compete against several thousand of his entries every day. Any other requests? Anybody got a hot QB that they're looking at? Or a hot captain option? Mamba says every QB since week 7 of last year against Dallas has been over 20 DK points. Is that right? It's pretty good. You can definitely pass on them. I just don't love Danny Dimes against a defense that can come into scoring. Over 80 yards, 3 TDs is 5K. For who? For what are we talking about? Devin points out that Danny Jones could steal some goal line rushes. Yeah, that could definitely happen. They definitely have that in their playbook. Wouldn't be my biggest concern there. I think they're going to be a little bit more precious rather than throwing Danny into the line. Like on a little, like bootleg type play where he's out safe, just running the other direction from everybody, then, maybe we get some of those. As far as like crashing through the line, I question whether they're going to throw him into that mix as much. But yeah, there is definitely with any kind of a rushing quarterback who will take off with the ball. And that definitely comes into play too if they're down, on the 7 and it's a passing situation and Dimes just takes off with the ball. So that could definitely come in. On the FanDuel slate, we'll just fly through a couple of these and I'll pull up Ace Mine real quick. I'll drop a Dak in there just because that's what was coming up like crazy. And then, obviously want to give him one of his pass catchers. I'll give him Ferg to work with just to start things off here. This is also not going down through. Oh, I know why. It's because the board has all the main slate projections in it. That's why it's so much longer today. All right, so Ferg, Dak, Ferg, go Malik. What if we go uncorrelated Malik? Shake things up a little bit. This is going to be too popular. Whew, 175 dupes. I didn't think it would be that much too popular. That's leaving a lot of money on the table, too. Okay. If we're going uncorrelated Malik, then Dallas defense makes some sense alongside that, but it's going to be really difficult to lower these numbers. This is also working with my tweaked ownership, which is probably driving things up maybe a little higher than they ought to be. No. Oh, where's Zeke? Let me put Zeke into that instead of the Cowboys D. Now I got 8, and I can take go double Cowboys running game. That would be a weird way to build a Dak lineup, and that's still duped through the nose. Jesus Christ. All right. I mean, what's he from 618? What's he if I do anything here? What's this going to come down to? 12? Still 12 if I go to Jalen Hyatt? Jeez. It's coming up with a lot of winners and a lot of positive ROI lineups in the sims that I glanced at, but it's difficult to build unique lineups with Dak in the captain spot. There's some good looking ones here, though. I just want to see what the so there's a little bit of a dispute between the ownership numbers that I have in here and the ones that are coming through in the Ace Mine sim. Maybe I reran that with the wrong ones. Well, either way, we'll take a look at some of those in a second. But let's build a non-Dak captain lineup on FanDuel real quick. Neighbors is the obvious target there. You could go Singletary, of course, as well. A weird one would be either Brandon Cooks or, in a lesser extent, Jake Ferguson. I'm going to take Cooks just for the heck of it because I feel like he'll be slightly lower owned. You definitely want Dak alongside with that. You could probably forgo CD if you're going to get the big day out of Cooks. And obviously there's a big cost to that. Pop Singletary in there to just kind of work on that ownership number. Aubrey makes some sense to that. And then Cowboys D. That's not bad. 8.4. It's not ideal, but it's not bad, and that's a totally viable lineup. Singletary just, up and down the field but doesn't score. Dallas defense does its thing, picks off Danny Dimes, takes one to the house. You only get, a limited game out of Dak, but he throws both touchdown passes to Brandon Cooks. Aubrey kicks a few field goals. I could see that lineup playing. Leaves $3,500 on the table if you want to make any changes. Obviously, there's plenty to work with. But sub 10 dupes on a slate like this, it's workable. Just to look at it. Yeesh. Don't love this one. And it's still duped 120 times. Might have gotten a little heavy with the ownership I put on Danny Jones, Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb, and Dak Prescott. Maybe. Challenging to build unique lineups with some of those guys in the captain roles. If you wanted to reduce from there, probably lean. I would probably take Wandale out, get one Cowboy in it. Like Cooks in there, and then leave money on the table by going like Joseph. And still going to be crazy. Theo, cheating. 20. Even with Theo in there, Greg Joseph and Theo Johnson, it's still 20 dupes in that one. It's going to be an ugly FanDuel slate. I got a feeling. Let me pull up some Ace Mind Sims. We'll take a look. About there. And let me get this up on the screen for you guys. It's 7:30 on the nose. There's some of your DK entries. See pretty solid level of Dak Prescott in the captain role. 48% of these top 250 lineups had Dak in the captain role on DK. That's how straightforward of a game this is. Part of that, though, is driven by the fact that CD comes in at a higher price. So there is that to contend with. And that's why you see a little bit more of Dak in the captain spot, CD in the flex. A lot of times we'll see that on DraftKings the reverse because typically the quarterback's coming in a little bit more expensive than the superstar wide receiver. Dak lands in the flex role basically every time, every lineup that he's not in the captain spot, he's in the flex spot. Danny Dimes, 92% of the time in a flex role, so pretty much, as I was getting at, every lineup has Dak and Daniel Jones in it. There's a common winning construction on DraftKings. You can see this top lineup, though. Dak, CD, Danny Dimes, Jake, Darius Slayton, and Theo Johnson gets us a fairly differentiated lineup. Theo landed in 28% of the top 250 here. Let's go down to 150 just to talk about a number of lineups that you can actually enter. But it's going to be similar, I bet. Theo lands in 31% of the top 150, all in a flex spot. But that's a piece for differentiation. That's a piece where if he catches a couple of targets, and they have targeted him in 2 out of the 3 games. Power, I'll pop back up to that. Power's asking for a triple running back, Zeke, Dowdle, and Singletary. I do like building those kind of lineups. I don't know that I've ever had one actually work out where I just went super running back heavy. Outside of maybe like that Miami game against Denver last year, if you had happened to play showdown entries on that one. But otherwise, it's been a challenging construction, but we can look at it in a sec. There's no real easy way to see if that landed in one of these. Not bad with the Ferguson lineup, though. Is a decent performer. A couple spots down here. Ferg, CD, Dak, Danny Jones, the Giants defense, and Darius Slate. And that's not going to be duped all that many times. Came away as a decent winner there. Your lineups here bringing in it's your ROI column. Here's your average cash. So your $15 entries are bringing back $180 on the average with a little bit of a shot toward wins and top 1%. This is weighted in terms of the sort with 60% of the weight just going into ROI and then a chunk of it going toward top win percentage, top 1%. Basically, it all is just going to even out to almost identical to a top ROI sort, but that's how I've got it set up. You can see definitely key to some of these top lineups, leaving a little bit of salary on the table just to create some room, some differentiation on these builds. These are going to be fairly popular constructions today. Brandon Cooks gets into a captain spot there, though. That's That's a top 10 lineup. Overall, Cooks 31% owned in the flex role across our top 150. 10% owned in the captain role, though. I'd be willing to bet, and I don't know the number that's in here off the top of my head, but I bet you he's projected for lower than 10% DraftKings ownership in a captain role. Assuming that he is, this is indicating that he should be owned more frequently than 10% or more frequently than a sub 10% number. Let's say he's projected for 5. That means he's owned half as much as he should be in the captain role by the field. So get out to like 10% Cooks in your captain spot. Singletary, I'm sure, is in here somewhere. Somebody mentioned having a big chunk of him. Although he's not easy to find. There he is. Singletary captain role, only 5% of our top 150, but that's not nothing. It's notably not nothing. And if it's higher than what the public number in the captain role is, fire away. You can absolutely load up a few additional shares and take a big chunk of Singletary and just do that knowing what you're doing. You're saying that you're taking this example, you're saying, all right, can get there. 5% of the top 150 in this specific sim. So there's a little bit of play into the winning lineups. And then within that, I'm just going to take a bigger position of something that I know has viability, and I'm embracing more risk in doing that, but I'm buying a much bigger share of it. I'm buying more opportunities, more bites at the apple on the night in which Singletary does succeed. All right, so it's a multi-stage decision as you're looking at it through that lens, but this tells me that he can get there. Ferguson was 5% of the captain shares as well, 35% of the flex. Neighbors, 18% of the flex, 7% in the captain in our top 150. It's probably owned right around that, maybe a little lower. CD, 44% flex, 17% captain. Noteworthy. Danny Dimes, 93% in the all flex, it looks like. Do we not get any Danny Dimes in the captain? That can't be. I guess not. He came up entirely flex, at least across these top 150. I always lose time as I'm doing this. I could sit here clicking around and just resorting these tables forever. I just want to see. Did we get him in our top 500 at least in the captain role? Did that not alphabetize? Saw an Aubrey captain up there. That's a lot of Dak. There's some Danny. So in the top 500 lineups, and again, this is out of 50,000 sims of 117,000 entries with dupes in there. So you get 50,000, 40,000 unique entries. So 500 lineups is not, a completely tiny, small sample against 117,000 entries. So in the top 500 performing lineups, he was in the captain role 4% of the time, 83% of the flex. But again, in our top 150 lineups, he was 90-something% all in the flex, no captain. I just want to see that Aubrey one real quick. And then we'll jump to some FanDuel, and then we'll punch out. Aubrey, 15% entirely in the flex. And I guess just this one lineup in the captain role? Why does that not show? That's weird. It is just this one, so I guess it's a sub 1%, 1 out of 500 lineup. So that's why they're rounding. So Brandon Aubrey's presence in the captain role amounts to a rounding error across our 500 lineups. But some good info there. I encourage everybody to check out acemine.io. Promo code RotoScouts gets you 20% off your first month. FanDuel board, and then we are out of here. Again, it is a absolute ton of Dak as you go down that MVP column. Makes all the sense in the world. Overall, this is not stratified between MVP and flex on FanDuel right now. 89% overall ownership for Dak. Danny Jones getting in there 85%. And then we immediately dip. Rico Dowdle, the most highly owned guy after that at 41 in our top 150 lineups. Ferguson, 33% exposure. The Cowboys at 33. Singletary at 29. And again, most of this is in the flex because of how frequently we're just getting Dak down the MVP column here. Only a few outliers that aren't Dak lineups among the top any at all. I know I saw some. There's a Neighbors. But that's what, 25 lineups down? This is not to say that this is the only approach to build. Obviously, there's some impact here from ownership numbers, and a lot of it's going to depend on where you get your ownership numbers. But these are definitely interesting looking lineups. A lot of strong ROI numbers. Average cash is 1 against a $9 FanDuel entry, but this is obviously a lower end average cash than you were getting on DraftKings for your 15 in a smaller field. FanDuel's difficult. You can see how much money these FanDuel lineups are leaving on the table to gain any kind of differentiation. Not a one of these approaches the max spend. That top performer up there on FanDuel was Dak, Danny Jones, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, and Rico Dowdle. Singletary, Wandale, and Tolbert in that next one. What you don't see in most of these top performers, who don't you see? You don't see Malik Neighbors. Don't necessarily in the very, very top ones even see CD. CD doesn't get in one until here. So just speaks to the value of making different choices. And that's what I was trying to do with some of those quick FanDuel builds of just not going, all right, Dak, CD, Daniel, Neighbors, and then who else? Because that's the straightforward, obvious thing that everybody's doing. So if you make your first decision different, your first after Dak in the MVP spot, apparently, make your next decision a little bit different. That's why I was leaning a little Cooks, a little Ferguson in there, some Rico Dowdle. Definitely that idea of putting both Dowdle and Zeke into a lineup and hoping for heavy volume on the ground with some carries each way and some red zone opportunities each way maybe gets a little viable. It's not at all the game script they played last week. It's a complete opposite. But against a bad Giants team, they might go that route. But definitely challenging to make winning constructions on FanDuel without being duped and getting any ROI out of it. The reason that you see these, again, these are your $90 winners. They're not pulling in. None of this is, nobody's Sim's going to tell you, hey, this lineup's going to win you $100,000 every time you enter it. But we're seeing a lot of cash left on the table. That's to create any kind of uniqueness at all. The lineups that are duped 250 times, that, yeah, it's the most high scoring, the most by a highest projection. It's going to be duped 250 times because it's just going to be straightforward Dak, CD, Neighbors, Danny Jones, and whoever. So it's just going to be duped, and it doesn't end up actually winning you any money because every time you chop, you're just whittling down your profits. Let me jump back over to our board. I hope that was showing. Was that just a white screen? I hope not. I think it just went white when I minimized it. All right. Which site did we want to see? We wanted a 3 running back. Was that a DraftKings request power? Zeke, Dowdle, Singletary. Who do you want in the captain spot? Tell me which site and tell me which captain MVP, and then we're out of here. DK, who do you want in the captain? Do you want me to decide? I mean, we can look at different options. Let's go Dowdle in the captain first. And then we want Singletary and Zeke. To me, that speaks to some kicker and some defense play maybe, and I'm going to separate them. I'm going to go the Dallas kicker and the Giants defense, and then you can have whatever you want. You're leaving, obviously, a ton of money on the table in this kind of a build. I would still lean into getting one of the quarterbacks in there, and between the two, I kind of prefer Dak. So I'd probably just do that for differentiation's sake, and then you're getting a six times duped is not too bad. You get the Giants defense out of there and change the equation a little bit. Give me like Ferg maybe to throw to. That makes sense with Dak. Yeah, you're up to 12 dupes. So maybe you don't go to Ferguson. Maybe you go like a Tolbert. Tolbert gives you 7. If you went Turpin, it'd probably be a little lower even. Yeah, there you go. That's getting down there. And in a game where it's, heavily into the running game, where Dowdle pays off a captain share and Zeke pays off a flex share, the idea that Devonta Turpin would also get involved in that kind of a game is not completely crazy. It doesn't project out like a lot, but that is very limiting to your dupes. If you want to change things up a little bit, we can go Singletary in the top spot. We'll go Dowdle here. Zeke still in there. And we'll kill those guys. Give me some Greg Joseph on the Giants side to support the rush game there. And we'll go right back to Dak. And I can't get Ceedee. I can't get Neighbors. I could get Dak and Danny. That's a weird little build considering the lack of pass catchers. Don't particularly love that one. You go that route. And then this would juice it back the other way probably. And then just like a weird Ferguson touchdown kind of plays. Again, these are gonna be naturally lower owned, lower end, lower projected lineups, just by the virtue of having all 3 running backs in there. You're kind of already carving out a big chunk, so it doesn't really matter as much what you do in these spots as far as what we're seeing here. But it obviously, of course, matters very much to your upside. Which is particularly when you choose an angle, when you're saying like, all right, I want to, I'm putting 3 running backs in this lineup. I've got a very clear idea of what this game's going to look like in this lineup's case. Just think through those remaining spots. All right, if I'm rush heavy that much, this game's going to play fast in terms of the clock, but that limits actual opportunities. So the game will go by quickly. They'll be chewing a lot of clock by virtue of running the ball as much as they will. We'll have limited opportunities for our receivers. Maybe more lean into some big play downfield type dart throw options as far as the receivers go, or heavily volume red zone type targets. And maybe you lean away from the I need 12 targets to really pay off my value kind of receivers. So that's why I leaned into, and then obviously, it speaks to the kicking game and the defenses a little bit for me. So that's why I lean toward, those kind of selections a little bit more. Hopefully that makes some sense. Let's see if we can round this one out, though. Let's give it like a Wandale and a Danny Jones. And we'll get some Giants going to end things. That's really duped, though, if you go that route. Pop their kicker into it. It's probably going to be too much. 12.5. If I change Wandale to Slayton, I bet that carves it down. Yeah, it halves it if you change to Slayton. You're obviously diminishing your opportunity, but that's interesting. Naked superstar receivers and a very limited tight end, and you're still duped 13 times. Just wanted to see what it looked like if I plugged in Neighbors and Ceedee there. You can obviously get 2 different versions of this, though. I mean, you're taking a ton of chance by saying, like, all right, I think Deuce Vaughn's going to get a target, or Schoonmaker's going to get a target, or Belly. Jalen Hyatt down the field is discussed. The only guy that actually fits kind of here, though, is Mr. Theo Johnson. Next up would probably be Deuce Vaughn in terms of I do expect he'll carry the ball. He'll touch the ball 5 times today. If you went with him, that would pad your running back situation even further, which would be a little bit crazy. Gets you under 10 dupes, but that is a very limited lane through which that lineup could actually succeed. So again, that's part of telling yourself the story. Is there really volume in the running game for all 3 of those guys to connect? Seems limited. So, some thoughts on the slate, gang. It's 7:48. I got to check out of here because I got to get some lineups in myself. So let me thank you all very much for your time, your likes, your subscriptions, and all of that fun stuff. Good luck out there tonight for those of you still hanging out here. You absolutely rock. Back tomorrow for a long baseball slate and a full breakdown of the main slate either tomorrow or Saturday. I'll let you know. Keep an eye on the site for any projections, news, etc., etc. Jump into the Discord. Follow the @RotoScouts Twitter handle. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. We'll see you tomorrow.